Chapter 1431. My lady, all the representatives have arrived and are waiting for your arrival. The door at the far end of the hall opened, and the other leader of the Crimson family, Meryl, walked in wearing a soft silk robe that fitted her body. She bowed behind Mary. In the past, they were good sisters who could talk about anything. However, as Mary's strength increased, the huge gap between them caused their relationship to become one of superior and subordinate. With the Crimson family's high-quality resources, it was not a problem to push Meryl and Amelia to the throne of Grade 4 Magi. However, the family's power could only stop there. Every small step beyond Grade 4 was extremely difficult and long, and it was not something that could be achieved with just the accumulation of resources. The two prideful women were obviously full of confidence in themselves. Hence, while they were busy with the complicated affairs of the family, they squeezed out time to train and enrich themselves. Although their ranks were not high, Meryl was only at the high grade 3, and Amelia was only at the mid-grade 3. However, their future potential was very impressive. At the very least, they were confident that they could advance to grade 4 with their own strength. This was also a way for them to achieve greater things in the future. According to past information, Magi who advanced to grade 4 with their own strength had a chance of climbing to the peak. For those who relied on resources, it would be a miracle if they could reach the mid-grade 4 in their lifetime. Since it's time, let's go down together. Mary retracted her gaze and turned around to look at the two women. She nodded slightly and took the lead to walk out of the hall. The people waiting outside the hall were the higher-ups of the Crimson family. Standing at the very front was the great sage goblin Kirby. He was less than a meter tall and wore an exquisite suit. As the elder goblin who had followed Grimm for the longest, he had lived for more than 300 years. In human terms, he was more than 800 years old. He had created the record for the longest lifespan of the goblin race. Although he had the support of many high-quality resources, Kirby's strength was still stuck at the high grade 2. As a result, he was nearing the limit of his life and was rapidly aging. But even so, on this important day, it still wore the gorgeous dress that represented its highest honor and rushed to bow in front of Mary. "Congratulations, Master. Congratulations, Master. Kirby sends his regards." If not for the two young gnome maidservants supporting him, Cabby would have fallen to the ground with his waist bent at a 90-degree angle. Mary swept her gaze past its body, and then she sighed and nodded slightly. Then, with a wave of her hand, a wave of blood energy poured into Cabby's body. At once Cabby's spirits improved visibly. "Just do what you can. Take care of yourself." Mary stopped in her tracks and gave a few reminders, before turning to look behind Kirby. "Locke, take care of Kirby today. Don't let him get too excited." After saying that, Mary started walking again. Locke was now a grade 3 intermediate Crimson Magus, and his position in the family had even surpassed Cabby and the other goblin nobles. After listening to Mary's instructions, he waved his hand to chase away the two gnome maids and supported Cabby as he followed behind the domineering mistress. Of course, they were ranked behind Meryl and Amelia. The higher-ups of the Crimson Magi who had been scattered in various corners gathered together, bowing to Mary before joining the group. Blood Knight Soros, Cloning Brain Sock, Bug Lich Bliss, Blood Knight Winsal, Blood Elf Wizard Isa, Blood Elf Archer Leia, Ice Maiden Chef, Berserk Witch Sophia, Forest Demon Ava, Old Fox Wenlier, Violent Blood Group Leader Duzula Lascelle, Dragonman Zacha. After all these years of development, the number of Grade 2 and Grade 3 Magi in the Crimson Magi had increased to over 300. The Magi who held the positions of the higher-ups of the Crimson Magi had also been replaced by a new batch of Magi. However, the elders before Mary still held a considerable position in her eyes. However, with the passage of time, some of the Crimson Elders had already withered away. The demonized Goblin leader Gonga, Goblin Tigula, Medusa, Manticore leader Daka, and Wind Wizard Desolar were nowhere to be seen. They had either died of old age, died in explorations to other worlds, or died in wizard experiments. They had disappeared forever. The banquet hall was located on the 7th level of the wizard's pagoda. When Mary led the higher-ups of the Crimson Magi into the hall, thunderous applause and cheers immediately rang out. The Magi from the Crimson Magi crowded on both ends of the red carpet, clapping and cheering loudly. When the well-dressed Mary walked in front of them, they all put their hands on their chests and bowed in greeting, their faces brimming with happiness and pride. As she walked through the crowd, Mary nodded to both sides in greeting. Those who could enter the main hall of the banquet were the elders who had followed the Crimson Magi for a long time or the freshmen of the academy. Even though most of them had never seen the legendary Blood Queen Mary before, it did not stop them from cheering for themselves, their families, and the bright future of the academy. Mixed in with the crowd were a group of strange faces from the secondary plane. Among them were humanoid giants, dark elves, beastmen, trolls, redstone dwarves, and gnomes. There were also strange-looking light men, flower elves, stonewalkers, and draconians. Light men were a strange race that fed on light. Their flesh and skin were formed by the condensation of light elements. They were practically natural-born light spellcasters, able to freely use all kinds of light abilities. Furthermore, light abilities had many additional abilities in terms of illusion and healing. Flower elves were not flower fairies. Even though they had similar names, they were two completely different magical creatures. Flower elves had green bodies and 2 pairs of thin cicada wings on their back. Even though they were only about half a meter tall, they had extremely savage personalities. Their claws and teeth contained poison, and their flying speed was also rather fast. Thus, as scouts or assassins, flower elves were also a type of magical creature that was rather difficult to deal with. Stonewalkers were a strange life form that was between life and earth elemental. The plane they resided in was made up of undulating mountain ranges and hills. It was rare to see the existence of water, fire, and green plants. Stonewalkers were born with the ability to travel underground. They also grasped quite a few earth abilities. They were good at prospecting and ambushing. Draconians were the descendants of the bloodline of the Dragon Clan and humans or other human-like races. Those who inherited the might of the Dragon Clan's bloodline from their father would awaken the corresponding bloodline ability. Even though it was difficult to nurture these Draconians into high-ranked ones, they were natural magic warriors that cultivated both magic and martial arts. Once they were integrated into an army, they would be a decent assault and meat shield unit. As for the outstanding ones among the Draconians, they were the best candidates for high-ranked magi to recruit as fighters or bodyguard. After all, the loyalty of the Draconians was well known. Of course, other than that, Mary also saw a few strange and indescribable fellows among the welcoming crowd. For example, a magus that looked like a sludge monster, a centaur magus, and a magus that looked like a sunflower that could walk freely. It had to be said that after the introduction of foreign students from the secondary plane, the gene bank of the Horton Witchcraft Academy was greatly replenished. After passing through the crowd, Mary stepped onto a large platform with 10 steps. There were already many representatives from all over the world waiting for her. Mary swept her gaze across the crowd and saw the Grade 4 Lightning Lord Arms in his human form. Beside him was the Emerald Dragon Eredna, who had also transformed into a beautiful young lady. Behind them, 10 bare-headed, green-skinned burly men were gathered together, pointing at the various enchantments on the walls and ceiling of the banquet hall. They seemed to be drooling with desire. Mary didn't even need to get close to them. She could tell from their aura that they were Grade 1 or 2 green dragons that had used transformation and camouflage spells. When Arms saw Mary, his coarse voice immediately shook the heavens. "Mary, you're finally here. I've been waiting for you with my brothers for a long time." Mary furrowed her brows and focused her gaze. An awe-inspiring and inviolable aura quietly spread throughout the hall. Arm's face immediately stiffened. Eredna, who was behind him, quickly stepped forward and pulled his arm to bow to Mary. The 10 green dragons in human form also hurriedly bowed to Mary. Arms, I'm glad you're here. Come with me. Mary smiled and walked past Arms. Arms scratched his head in annoyance and asked Eredina in a low voice, "Did I say something wrong again?" Eredina rolled her eyes at him and said in a low voice, "All human wizards care about their dignity. You must show Lady Mary enough respect." Respect. Arm's face immediately fell. He said angrily, "She can't even defeat me. Why should I respect her?" "Humph, if it wasn't for Lord Grim, I would've." Hurry up and shut up for me. You're not allowed to talk nonsense today." Although Eredina was only a grade 3 green dragon, she was smart enough to know more about wizards than Arms. She could only use this method to prevent him from making mistakes. After walking past Arms, Mary walked straight to a corner of the platform. There, a large group of black-robed necromancers had gathered around the famous undead Lich Congnus. Chapter 1432. Welcome, Mr. Congnus. Mary showed due respect to the undead Lich. Apart from being the head of necromancy in Horton Academy, he was also the only powerful spellcaster Grim had mentioned to be on par with him in the future. Either of these 2 points was worthy of Mary's respect. "It's my duty." As a top-tier undead Lich, Congnus had long discarded his rotting skin and turned his bones into a strange substance similar to a magic crystal. This substance had high magic resistance and defensive capabilities, making it immune to the attacks of small enchanted weapons. As Congnus fused with the austere chest, his Lich body was covered in 2 layers of magic light similar to a halo of laws. Ordinary grade 4 wizards would have to suffer the combined effects of death and winter energy if they were to get close to him, let alone fight him. Their strength would be greatly reduced before the battle even started. The only reason Congnus was willing to attend the celebration was because of Grim. He raised his crystal head, revealing 2 round rubies in his empty eye socket. His crimson soulfire that looked like a cross was hidden behind the rubies. "I didn't come alone. I brought a few friends with me," Congnus said as he turned to Mary. "This is the Lamia Sekina, and this is the Sand King. They're all old friends of Grim's. And this is the Lich Rizath." At that point, he switched to telepathy and started chatting with Mary. "Rizath is here as a representative of the Lich League. He hopes to meet with Mr. Grim. I wonder if you can make the arrangements, Lady Mary?" Mary's expression changed slightly. Her gaze swept across the faces of the visitors one by one. She had to admit that those who could meet Congnus had to be at least grade 4. A powerful grade 4 Lamia, a powerful grade 4 insectoid lord, and a mysterious grade 4 Lich emissary. None of these fellows were easy to deal with, and Ye Yen had no idea when Grim had befriended them. "Why don't you stay here for a few days, Mr. Congnus? I will try to contact Grim as soon as possible. If it's appropriate, he will definitely come out to meet everyone." Mary comforted her gently. She knew that with her connections and qualifications, it was impossible for her to invite these experts from other planes. The reason why he was willing to travel hundreds of millions of kilometers to the sorcerer world to participate in the founding ceremony of a new organization was all because of Grim. From this point of view, it seemed that Grim's management of the foreign forces was not a blank slate. Having received the promise, Congenus didn't pester him any further. At Mary's invitation, they followed behind her and walked to the banquet platform. The banquet platform was a huge square hall that was 10,000 meters in size. At the very top, there were 3 high-back chairs of different colors, 1 big and 2 small. The chair in the middle was the largest and was dark red in color. There were 2 smaller chairs on the left and right of the chair, and their positions were closer to the back. The color of the left was pitch black, and it was dotted with specks of silver light that represented the stars. The color of the right was bright red, like flowing blood. Mary, dressed in splendid attire, walked straight to the blood-colored high chair on the right, turned around, and sat down. The guests and envoys entered the hall and took their seats under the guidance of the Academy's wizards. Soon, the hall was filled to the brim. At this moment, many young elven ladies with lithe figures swarmed in, serving fruits and drinks to the magi and experts from other dimensions. Different races had different preferences, so the contents displayed were different as well, and they were as different as day and night. Taking advantage of this free time, Mary sat on her chair and looked around, identifying the guests one by one. Lightning Lord Arms, his lover, and his subordinates Serpentine and her 4 tribesmen. The odd-looking Sand King was alone, Lich Congnus, the envoy from the alliance of Liches and Lethus, and his subordinates. The many grade 4 wizards in the central continent, their families, and subordinates. At the front of the first group on the right side of the hall, Mary saw a group of aliens that looked completely different from humans. The Hinagas were strange creatures that lived in the deep sea. They had indigo-colored skin and dense fish scales on their bodies. They had snake-like tails and naked upper bodies like human beauties. They were generally pretty, with long, thin faces and seaweed-like green hair. Their lips were purplish-black, and their necks, wrists, and ears were adorned with scallops, corals, and luminous pearls. Most of the sea creatures looked strange and did not fit the aesthetic standards of human wizard. However, the Hinagas were an exception. They had human-like appearances and high intelligence. Their large population allowed them to cultivate a large number of witches. Yes, the Hinagas had a strict gender division. Most of the male Hinagas were melee fighters, while the female Hinagas were spellcasters like witches or priestesses. Although the other marine creatures weren't weak, only the Hinaga tribe was willing to maintain contact with the human magi on land and interact with them. On the surface, the Hinaga tribe was here to participate in the Horton Sorcerer Academy's founding celebration. However, in reality, they were here to meet and greet the powerful human sorcerers who had come from all over the world. They wanted to exchange some sorcerer resources that they needed. The alchemy of the merfolk was primitive and crude, so they coveted the magic artifacts, tools, and accessories of human wizards. What they could bring out were rare deep-sea fishes, corals, ores, and other magic materials. Such an exchange was beneficial to both sides, which was why the Hinagas were so eager to participate in all the magician events on the continent. After nodding at the Hinagar, who was a grade 4 witch, sire, Mary shifted her gaze to the underground people beside them. Just like other planes, the Magus world had an underground world that was completely isolated from the surface. Although resources, food, and population were extremely scarce, it still nurtured some unique underground life forms. However, it was difficult to nurture true spellcasters in such a dark and serene environment. Hence, the underground creatures that came to congratulate them were lizard assassins, spiritual insects, and other special life forms. The reason why they came to participate in the celebration of the Horton School of Witchcraft was similar to the Hinagas. They wanted to use the opportunity to trade or exchange resources across regions. In this aspect, if they wanted to occupy a place in the trade system of the central continent, it was inevitable to negotiate with the Horton School of Witchcraft, the largest wizard organization in the central continent. To show their sincerity, both sides brought a large number of rare resources from their respective regions as gift. As for these, Mary only needed to accept them with a smile. As for the details of the negotiations, Amelia or Merrill would discuss it with them. After dealing with the two races appropriately, Mary turned her attention to the other two wizard organizations that came to congratulate them, the Silver Alliance and the Northern Witches. The representative from the Silver Alliance was still Deputy Chairman Meloni. Behind him were a few Alliance counselors in silver robes with silver badges on their chests. The Silver Alliance was also a wizard organization that did not restrict one's origin or race. They only valued one's arcane strength. Hence, the counselors had a mix of races. There were humans, elves, dwarves, and mouse people. These counselors were almost all puppet masters. Exquisite magic armor runes could be seen everywhere on their bodies. These magic armor runes were like another layer of skin covering their bodies. They were engraved with intricate magic patterns, and from time to time, they would emit eye-catching elemental aura. This magic armor rune technique was also an arcane ability unique to the Silver Alliance. Once there was a need for battle, these metal-like magic armor runes would arm the puppet masters in the shortest time possible. The runes engraved on them would also grant them special sorcery abilities. A puppet master with a magic armor rune was equivalent to having an extra set of magic armor, one that could aid him in battle. Hence, the puppet masters might be relatively weak, but once they fused with the magic armor runes, they could unleash power that was several times stronger than their original bodies. This was an alternative path of strengthening that the arcane sorcerers had opened up for themselves. Noticing Mary's gaze, Deputy Chairman Meloni stood up and said loudly, "This time, I'm appointed by Chairman Salvini to be the representative to congratulate you. This is a gift specially prepared by the Silver Alliance. I hope you like it, Your Excellency Mary." With that, Meloni signaled with his eyes. A mouse counselor beside him stood up, took out a square silver chessboard, and tossed it to the center of the hall. Then, the silver chessboard expanded rapidly, instantly becoming a huge chessboard that occupied an area of 100 meters. There were 32 metal chess pieces of different colors and shapes on the left and right sides of the chessboard. These metal chess pieces were armored warriors with huge shields and swords, court wizards with magic staffs, gnomes and dwarves pushing magic cannons, beast tamers driving wild beasts. Looking at the shape and style, it was a popular board game among the nobles of the Sorcerer Continent. Chapter 1433. What an exquisite design! Mary clicked her tongue in admiration. Everyone watched as the puppet chess pieces on the chessboard moved forward or backward under the control of the association's wizards. Every time two chess pieces met, a fierce battle would break out. Every puppet chess piece had been preset with different combat methods and strange combat skills. In order to win, apart from basic combat power, the subtle mental strength of the wizard controlling it also depended on the subtlety of the wizard controlling it. If the wizard on one side had a strong enough mind power, even if he was controlling the most ordinary sword and shield guards, he would be able to charge into the other side's magic palace and drag the mage emperor down from his horse. Hence, it was obvious that this was a game created to train the spiritual force of magi. It was just that the chess pieces had been given a strange life force by the arcane wizards, so they had different combat abilities. More importantly, when creating these puppet chess pieces, the arcane sorcerers had mixed in a type of Manda's alloy. This was also a well-known memory metal. Even if the puppet chess pieces were damaged, as long as enough magical energy was injected into the chessboard wizard tool, everything would slowly recover. Mary smiled. After expressing her gratitude to Meloni, she ordered her men to keep the gift. Although the gift was exquisite, it did not have any special effect on the Horton Academy of Witchcraft. Perhaps this was the original intention of the Silver Alliance. After all, there was still a relationship of interest between the two sides. They would never give strategic resources as a gift to the Horton Academy of Witchcraft. After the Silver Alliance was the Northern Witches. This time, they actually sent the leader of the Deception Witches, Angelina, and the gift she brought was 2 small resource planes. Although the gift was not expensive, it was much more practical than the one from the Silver Alliance. Mary expressed her gratitude again, and ordered someone to accept the crystal runes with the spatial waymarks of the resource planes. Only then did she raise her glass and drink with everyone. However, before the congratulations from the crowd had ended, there was a sudden commotion outside the wizard's pagoda. Mary frowned slightly and looked sideways at Amelia, who was sitting on her left in the audience. Amelia's hand was overflowing with a green halo, as if she was communicating with something from afar. After a few words, Amelia's expression changed slightly. She looked up at Mary and said softly, "The people from the Wizard Association are here. They're coming all the way here." Although Amelia said it lightly, Mary could feel the meaning behind it. If those people from the Sorcerer Association had teleported here according to etiquette, and the Academy's sorcerers were in charge of receiving them, it would not have caused such a commotion outside. Therefore, it was highly likely that these bastards had forced their way in. Merrill, go and welcome them. Mary sneered coldly. In case these fellows from afar say that we are rude again. Yes. Merrill agreed and stood up suddenly. The wide red dragon wings on her back instantly spread open, and she flew out of the Sorcerer Hall with a strong gust of wind. With the red dragon bloodline's nourishment, Merrill's strength had improved by leaps and bounds. Now, she looked like she could break through to Tier 4 within the next century. As a result, her personal network became stronger and more active. Everyone put down their wine glasses and conversed silently while waiting for the messenger from the Mage Association to arrive. Those who come do not come with good intentions, and those with good intentions do not come. Although they were here to congratulate Leyland, there was still competition between the various sorcerer organizations. Hence, was the Mage Association here purely to congratulate Leyland or to take the opportunity to put on a show of strength? This was something that was unknown. Very soon, the messenger from the Mage Association flew into the hall accompanied by Merrill. There were 7 people in total. One of them was a strange female magus with no eyebrows and purple eyes. She wore purple soft armor, had a bald head, and no eyebrows. The other was a short male magus with a bowed back and a hooked nose. His eyes were a deep green and his teeth were yellow. His hair was sparse and messy, and he wore a black robe studded with all sorts of gems. When they saw the newcomer, all the guests present shuddered in unison as they felt a wave of domineering aura rushing towards them. Super powerhouses. The 2 people in the lead were peak Tier 4 super powerhouses. Behind him were 3 men and 2 women. Although their auras were only at rank 3, their auras were extremely valiant. It was as if they had experienced bloody battles and climbed out of a pile of corpses. Even the weakest among them was a peak Tier 3 magus. Mary was slightly shocked, but her expression did not change. She stood up and coldly said with a smile that did not reach her eyes, "I was wondering who it was. So it's Lady Gloria and Lord Savorius. Both of you have come from afar, and I would like to represent Grimm to welcome you all. Please." However, the 2 super powerhouses did not seem to care. They floated in the middle of the hall and slowly looked around at the people in the hall. Under their cold aura, everyone's expression changed slightly, and their expressions became unnatural. Super experts would always be a top-notch force in the plane world. Perhaps it was due to the explosion of pseudo-super powerhouses in the central region during this period of time that made super powerhouses seem less valuable. However, today, after experiencing the terrifying spiritual pressure of a true super powerhouse at such a close distance, everyone present trembled and felt fear from the bottom of their hearts. The Magi at Tier 4 were fine, as they could still sit steadily in the face of such pressure. However, those below Tier 4 were restless, and their expressions were filled with fear. If they allowed the other party to bully the guests in such an unbridled manner, as long as one of the mid-ranked Magi or otherworld creatures present broke down and cried out, it would be equivalent to giving the Central Continent's Magi a ruthless slap in the face. They could not let such a thing happen. Mary's body trembled slightly, and she suppressed the anger in her heart. Her scarlet eyes released a blood-red ripple, and she resisted the pressure from afar. However, it was a pity that she had not truly reached the peak of Tier 4, and the Nightmare Castle was tens of thousands of miles away. These 2 points meant that it was impossible for her to resist the spiritual pressure of these 2 super powerhouses that were filled with malice. Seeing that the situation was not good, Monash Gaia, the leader of the Golden Clan, took advantage of the situation and stood up. He said softly, "Since Lady Mary has invited the esteemed guests to take a seat, it would be best for everyone to sit down." While raising his hand, Gaia condensed his spiritual force and entered the hidden battle. Although the Golden Giant was strong, it mainly relied on its physique and lightning ability. In terms of spiritual force, it could not compare to the two super powerhouses in front of it. Gaia suddenly let out a muffled groan, and his entire body began to emit a layer of hazy golden light. The curse wizard, Savorius, snorted coldly with a smile that did not reach his eyes. The two of us are here to congratulate you on behalf of the Magus Association. What's wrong? That Grimm is so arrogant that he's not even willing to meet us? The other Magus, Gloria, had a cold expression and did not say a word. It was obvious that she was also allowing Savorius to pester them endlessly. Many of the Central Continent's magi present stood up in unison, gnashing their teeth at the rudeness of the Magus Association. However, the other party did not actually make a move. He was only using the spiritual pressure unintentionally to bully the people. If the Central Continent's magi were to make a move, they would become murderers who started a war and destroyed the peace. That was the real reason why Mary and Gaia could not transform and deal with the Magus Association. The Sorcerer Association had easily sent two super powerhouses over, and they had forced the Central Continent to transform without even blinking an eye. If word of that spread, the entire Central Continent would be shamed. Even the newly established Horton Witchcraft Academy would be looked down upon. It couldn't be helped, since Mary and Gaia could only be considered pseudo-mega powerhouses. Without being able to transform, they could not even reach the level of a pseudo-mega powerhouse. The guests of the various regions had no intention of participating. They crossed their arms and waited for the result of the hidden battle with a cold smile. Serpentina and the Sand King were shocked to see that. They turned to look at Lich Kongnas, only to find that he was unmoved, as if he was not going to interfere. The two looked at each other. Even though they were confused, they maintained the same stance as the Sand King and watched from the sidelines. Among the people present, Lightning Lord Arms was as calm as a mountain. He did not seem to notice anything at all. No matter how Aratina pinched him, he did not care. He seemed to be waiting to see Mary make a fool of herself. Just as the atmosphere in the hall became more and more stagnant and Mary and Gaia were about to transform, an unusually clear voice rang out in the hall. "Oh, there are quite a few guests here today. Mary, why didn't you ask them to sit down? Why did you make them stand here as punishment?" The voice was not loud, but it was unusually shocking. On the other hand, when everyone present heard this, their expressions changed drastically, and they were extremely terrified in their hearts. That was because they didn't hear it with their ears. Instead, it was engraved into their minds by an unknown force. That was what shocked them the most. If the owner of the voice etched into their minds was not a voice, but a spell, the mere thought of it made them break out in a cold sweat. Everyone's eyes widened. They quickly scanned the hall, trying to find the owner of the voice. It was a pity that with their strength, they could not even figure out what method the other party was using. How could they possibly find the owner of the voice? However, not everyone present was a rookie. All the powerhouses who had grasped the power of laws and had stepped into the domain of laws all turned their heads to look at the high platform. There, light flickered, and Grimm appeared in front of the high-backed chair in the middle of the hall. He slowly sat down. His body exuded a gentle and pure aura of light from inside out, from top to bottom. Light? Chapter 1434. You're Grimm. No, you're not. You're one of his clones. Savorius widened his eyes as he looked at Grimm, who was sitting on the high chair. He started to speak incoherently. Grimm's current form was very strange. His entire body was like a dazzling, transparent humanoid. His entire body was condensed from pure and gentle light elements, and his body was covered with a large number of mysterious patterns drawn by blinding white light. Moreover, the aura on his body was even more obscure and hard to fathom. Grimm, who had turned into a figure of light, raised his head and smiled at Savorius, who looked like a clown. "It's only been 5 years, and I didn't expect you to be able to come out and cause trouble again. Looks like the fire last time wasn't fierce enough." Hearing Grimm mention the word fire, the eccentric and somewhat neurotic Savorius instantly lost his calm and slyness, revealing the other side of his powerful abilities. The fire in the Black Ink Valley had almost melted his entire body and soul. If not for the association taking out a top-notch treasure to help him get rid of the rules of fire, he might still be struggling in the Wizard's Pagoda's alternate dimension. Savorius's eyes were wide open, and his face was twisted. He pointed at Grimm with his trembling right hand and hissed, You what? You're just a loser and you still dare to strut around here? Who gave you the guts? Don't tell me. Did Domhnall send you here to declare war on the central continent? Grimm's voice suddenly turned cold. Savorius's dry lips trembled like butterflies in the cold wind, and his fingers trembled for a long time before dropping to the ground. Declare war on behalf of the Wizard Association? He didn't dare. Bravely challenge him? He didn't dare either. At that moment, this guy, who had once stood above tens of thousands of wizards, didn't know how to deal with this powerful fire wizard who gave him a huge headache. It seemed probably that every time he saw this guy, he would suffer. Gloria, who was letting the mad dog, Savorius, bite as he pleased, narrowed her eyes and stepped forward. She said coldly, Grimm, we're here to congratulate you on behalf of the association. What, is this how you treat your guest? Grimm chuckled and said, You're here to congratulate me? I thought you were here to cause trouble. After saying that, he glanced at the visiting wizards of the association and couldn't help but let out a strange laugh. I thought it would be Amway. I didn't expect it to be you. What, the old guys in the association have decided to support Amway and put you aside. Don't tell me those grade 5 resources are all in Amway's hands? Hearing this, even Gria's face turned abnormally ugly. Although she really wanted to refute him angrily, but the little thorn in her heart was already faintly aching from his provocation. Even she couldn't find the right words to fight back. This Grimm was cunning. Although his words were just mocking words, they had deeply touched Gloria's sore spot. Indeed, after experiencing the previous war, although the association had paid a heavy price, they had also obtained a batch of extremely rare grade 5 resources. If these resources were used properly, it would be enough to send Amway and Gria, who were hovering at the threshold of grade 5, into the ranks of the great wizards. However, judging from the amount of resources, it seemed that the association could only guarantee one lucky person. If Gria was this lucky person, then the association should fully protect her and wholeheartedly prepare to break through the threshold of the great wizard. As for this trivial matter of coming to the central continent to show off, no matter what, it would not fall on the head of the future great wizard Seed. Therefore, even without any information to support it, Grimm's casual guess had instantly dampened Gria's forceful momentum. Grade 5 resources. Amway. The secret of these high-level figures immediately caused a small uproar in the banquet hall. The powerhouses and representatives who didn't know the truth all whispered to each other, secretly trying to find out the ins and outs of the matter. Large organizations like the Silver Alliance and the Northern Witches already knew what was going on, so they didn't show any signs of surprise. Wizard Amway is already in seclusion in the Dark Residence. Perhaps, the next time we see him, he'll already be a high and mighty grade 5 wizard. Deputy Chairman Meloni of the Silver Alliance raised his wine glass and said loudly, Come, let us toast in advance to congratulate Wizard Amway. I hope that he'll be the next great wizard to step out of the plane of existence. Drink. With that, Meloni downed the wine in his glass in one gulp. In the next moment, everyone in the banquet hall raised their glasses and drank to their heart's content. All sorts of blessings and praises rang out incessantly. However, no one would be able to figure out what they were really thinking in their hearts. With such a jest, the arrogant and domineering aura of the few people from the Sorcerer Association that came with no rhyme or reason collapsed in an instant. Even Gria's momentum was greatly reduced. She could only bitterly lead the sorcerers of the association to their seat. As for the gift that Gria brought from the association, it was a batch of 30,000 otherworld slaves. The races included Tauren, Bearman, Troll, and Kobold. They were good candidates to be cannon fodder or mine miners. In this regard, Grimm accepted it with a smile without batting an eyelid. It was rare to see Grimm, who hadn't shown his face for a long time. Deputy Chairman Maloney immediately squinted his eyes and chuckled. "Lord Grimm, I'm here on the order of an old man to ask you if that promise still stands." Although he spoke vaguely, Grimm instantly understood what he was referring to. Grimm, who had transformed into a figure of light, suddenly inserted his right hand into his chest. When he pulled it out, there was a simple storage ring in his hand. Then, in the next second, the ring floated to Deputy Chairman Maloney by an invisible force. Maloney picked up the ring and probed it with his spiritual force. After a slight twirl, he immediately put it away with a wide grin. "Lord Grimm, this is a serious matter. I won't be staying here any longer. They're still waiting for my reply. In short, the Silver Alliance won't interfere with the Central Continent's affairs anymore." With that, Deputy Chairman Maloney left the venue with his subordinates and returned to the Alliance's territory through the teleportation formation. When they saw Grimm, the guests who had been waiting for a long time immediately sent him messages. In an instant, more than 10 communication requests from different people appeared in Grimm's mind. Seeing how busy Grimm was, Mary sighed inwardly. She knew that this world was a crazy world that focused purely on individual strength. Although she barely had the strength of a pseudo-supreme being, she was still a little immature and inexperienced compared to these top beings, who came from different regions and planes of existence. If it weren't for Grimm, perhaps the top beings from other planes like the Lich, the Lamia, and the Bug Tribe Overlord wouldn't have appeared here. In the past, although Mary had made a name for herself in the plane, compared to Grimm, her scope and vision were still too low. Although she hated being labeled as a housekeeper, she had no choice but to accept it and help Grimm win over these powerhouses who came from all over the world. The ceremony had officially begun. With the appearance of the Wizard's Pagoda, the whole of Iron Forest City was immediately immersed in a sea of jubilation. Within the space of nearly 100 miles, colorful and dazzling elemental spells flew into the sky and exploded into beautiful fireworks. Groups of Pegasi, chimeras, firebirds, and other flying magical creatures flew freely in the sky, scattering countless beautiful petals along the way. Groups of strange magical machines began to appear on the streets of Iron Forest City, dancing and singing along with the cheerful music. They posed in all kinds of weird poses amidst the crowd, causing the wizards and apprentices nearby to laugh heartily. The Dark Moon Circus, which was made up of strange creatures from other planes, began to perform on the street. They used their beautiful and dazzling special abilities to perform all kinds of strange performances, which attracted many wizards to stop and watch. Large tables were placed at every corner of the street, piled with exotic delicacies from different planes. There were many different styles, making it hard for people to choose between them and be reluctant to part with them. This was where the low-level magi and acolytes celebrated, while the truly important figures and high-level magi gathered in the banquet hall. They gathered in groups of 2s and 3s according to their preferences, forming countless circles of various sizes. They chatted enthusiastically and privately. Everyone from the Crimson family came out to entertain these guests from different regions. On the other hand, Grimm did not stay idle either. In the secret chamber, he met with groups of allies and partners who had different motives and intentions. The first group he met was naturally the Lich Congnus, as well as the envoy of the Lich Alliance, Rethas. Their intentions surprised Grimm. They wanted to invite him to explore the necropolis of the god of death together. But due to his special situation, Grimm hesitated and could only politely decline. He knew his situation best, and it was not suitable for him to go out and explore. During the battle at Black Ink Valley, he'd turned into a devouring demon fish and bit off the head of Renai's flame projection. There was a shard of the divine spark hidden within. With such a powerful object and a strand of Renai's divine soul attached to it, Grimm had been locked in a stalemate for many years. That was why Grimm's main body remained hidden beneath the collapsed blazing flame monarch, locked in a fierce battle with Renai's divine soul. Chapter 1435. To be honest, Grimm did not dare to go out anymore. In terms of wealth, Grimm could be said to be extremely wealthy. However, in terms of strength, he was as weak as a little sheep. This was not him being humble, but his true thoughts reflected from his heart. Law crystals, the corpse of a rank 5 lesser lord of calamity, a divine fragment. Any one of these items was enough to tempt a rank 5 powerhouse, let alone a rank 4 predator that was as ferocious as a wolf or a tiger. Grimm was currently relying on the plane's blessing. In the Magus world, he was practically invincible in his semi-advanced state, and no one could resist his almost cheat-like inextinguishable flames. However, once he stepped out of the Magus world, he would still be a rank 4 Magus who had yet to advance completely. With such a precious treasure on him, he would probably become an ideal target for the predators of other planes. His enemies were no longer the high-ranked magi who fought for power within the plane, but the planar predators who lurked in the shadows and waited for the right opportunity to strike. Hence, Grimm did not plan to step out of the plane until he truly advanced to rank 5. The necropolis of the god of death. Perhaps Grimm's current wealth was already comparable to that of the god of death. The liches had invited him to explore the necropolis of the god of death, but who knew if their true target was the god of death or himself? Grimm used empty words to evade the death invitation, then turned down the Lamia and the Sand King's invitations. Only then did he reluctantly send them away one by one. After Grimm had dealt with all the guests, Mary, who had been waiting patiently for a long time, directly barged in and grabbed his collar, asking in a low voice, "How are you now?" In actuality, Grimm did not have a collar for Mary to grab after he turned into a figure of light. However, in order to appease the emotional Mary, he could only conjure a collar for her to grab. Faced with Mary's questioning, Grimm could only spread out his hands and sigh. "You can see for yourself that this is my current state. My body is stuck at the blazing flame monarch, and I'm afraid I won't be able to come out for a while. If I want to go out, I can only use this body of light." Mary sniffed and said with a frown, "Why does this body have a unique smell of blood? It doesn't seem to belong to you." "Because the original blood used to build this body came from Jaredin of the Sorcerer Association. Although I've tried my best to adjust it, it still maintains a special spiritual connection with the light elemental sorcerer," Grimm said with a bitter smile. "You mean he can sense your mental and emotional changes?" "That's not true. Instead, if we get too close to each other, we can sense each other's location and vague mental state through our mental connection." "How close is too close?" "Within 10,000 li. However, his strength is inferior to mine, so he might only be able to sense my presence within 100 miles. Isn't this a serious problem in the future? If the association does something about this, you'll be in deep trouble at the critical moment." You don't have to worry about this. I bet that at this very moment, the light elemental envoy Jaredin must be paranoid and having a hard time figuring out what is going on. If he dares come to the Midlands, I don't mind swallowing him whole. This way, the strength of my light avatar will increase a little. Saying this, Grimm could not help but laugh proudly, and his right hand silently reached for Mary's waist. Unfortunately, his hand was swept away by Mary's claws when it was only halfway out, leaving 5 terrible wounds that went deep enough to reach the bone. The light avatar had no blood, only endless light element. After the skin was damaged, there was no sign of flesh and blood, only translucent bones and transparent skin that glowed with light. Light elementals excelled at disguising and purifying, so this kind of damage would disappear with a flash of white light. Mary fiercely bared her teeth and threatened, "Don't even think about touching me if you have someone else's smell on you. Don't try to fool me with your avatar in bed." Ah. Grim was stunned and said in horror, Then I'm afraid you'll have to wait for 100 years. 100 years it is, I can endure it. Anyway, before your true body comes out, if you dare to touch me with your clone, I'll tear you apart. If you can't hold it in anymore, you can go find Alice and see if she'll let your clone sleep with her. Mary warned with a serious expression. If even Mary could not accept this avatar, then it was even more impossible for the shy Alice. Grim suddenly felt like he was struck by lightning, and all his hopes turned to dust and despair. However, he quickly adjusted his mood and called out to Mary before she left. He took out another storage ring from his body and held it in his palm, saying softly, "This avatar of mine has to protect my main body, so I can't leave the blazing flame monarch. I'll have to trouble you with the matters of the Midlands in the next 100 years. These are some things I obtained from the association, and they'll be useful to you. Keep them. You can recall the Shadelord. Your main body is more important. There's no need. No one would dare to go to my main body easily. If someone did, I'm afraid a Shadelord wouldn't be able to stop them. On the other hand, you're in dire need of someone strong enough to hold the fort. Let it stay by your side." After saying this, Mary heard no sound behind her for a long time. She suddenly turned around, only to find that Grim had long since left. In his place was a small, exquisite, and beautiful ring. Picking up the ring, Mary sensed the jars of blood from rank 5 creatures within, and a trace of worry appeared on her pretty little face. Once upon a time, they had been acolytes together, struggling bitterly in dangerous situations. They had then become magi together, and they had walked this path with great difficulty. Now, his footsteps were getting faster and faster. Could she still catch up to him? This caused the proud and arrogant Blood Queen Mary to feel a little uncertain. As a special blood shaman, her advancement was restricted by the potential of her bloodline. Looking through the records of magi, there had never been a vampire who could surpass rank 5 in the multiverse. There had never been a vampire god in a single plane, and there had never been a rank 5 blood shaman in a single plane. It was as if vampires were creatures of this plane through and through, unable to survive outside of it. This meant that as a blood shaman, Mary's future path had been completely cut off. There were no bloodline inheritances she could learn from. If she wanted to advance further, she could only rely on the power of her current bloodline and find a new path. After all these years of exploration, she also discovered that the only thing that could push her to continue to grow was the blood rule law. Vampire magi built their power around the law of blood. However, their bloodline was too heaven-defying, and it was difficult for them to receive the blessing of the plane's consciousness. Hence, there were even fewer vampires who could use the law of blood to extend their power to the level of laws. After all, in order to support a peak rank 4 vampire, the number of beings in the plane who had been contaminated by her bloodline would number in the millions. In order to advance to rank 5, the amount of blood essence that she would need to absorb would be unimaginable. Anyone with half a brain would be able to imagine that the plane's consciousness would not care for such a malignant tumor. If not for the fact that Mary had been persuaded by Grimm to rarely expand her vampire subordinates in the Magus world, and did not attempt to build a large army of blood thralls, the plane's consciousness would have long since been unable to tolerate her. Now that Grimm had provided her with the blood of a rank 5 creature, Mary no longer needed to collect the blood essence of the plane bit by bit. This way, she could reduce the hatred the plane's consciousness had for her, and take the opportunity to comprehend the so-called law of blood. The reason why she was so serious was actually just to catch up to the figure that was getting further and further away. The only benefit Grimm gained from turning into light was that his flight speed and camouflage techniques were much stronger than before. With a flash of light, Grimm left the wizard's pagoda. He circled above Iron Forest City and observed for a moment, before turning into a ray of white light and flying towards the blazing flame monarch. With his current level 4 abilities, as well as the unique characteristics of his soul and body, there was no one who could track him in the air. Thus, he advanced silently, flying over region after region. He watched as the land below him gradually turned from brown to black, and the density of the ancient trees in the forest increased. Finally, after flying for 10,000 miles, he could no longer find any traces of humans on the ground. Instead, the various insects, fish, birds, and beasts became more active. After flying for another 100 miles into the black forest, the greenery in front of him suddenly disappeared, replaced by a startlingly vast, scorched land. This scorched land had a circumference of 100 miles, and its outer perimeter was charred black and cracked. The deeper he went, the denser the cracks on the ground became. When they were within 50 kilometers of the core area, the ground was dotted with lava pools and small flaming hills. He could even see a large number of fire creatures here. They were like carefree wild creatures, playing, roaming, and living in this land filled with the smell of fire and sulfur. They refused to allow any non-flame creatures to enter. It was because of this unique characteristic of their race that Grimm did not choose to deal with them. Instead, he allowed them to roam the area, using them as scouts for the blazing flame monarch. Grimm flew further in, only stopping when he reached the lava lake that had a circumference of 5 miles. Above the lava lake, above the clouds, a giant airship with the Crimson family's insignia hovered silently. He could faintly sense the auras of hundreds of wizards and acolytes within it. This was the Crimson family's permanent military force stationed in the Lava Lake region, and there was a Grade 3 wizard stationed there all year round. However, with their strength, how could they detect Grimm's tracks? Chapter 1436. Time flew by like a shuttle. 80 years passed just like that. 80 years. It was not a short time, but it was not a long time either. It was a lifetime for some people, but in the eyes of the dragons, it was just a short nap. For some of the fellows buried in the lava lake, it was just a small step forward, jumping from the 4th tier to the 5th tier. Rank 5 was actually a dividing line. Level 5 and below, even if they could summon the wind and summon the rain in the dimension, moving mountains and moving mountains, in the eyes of the great sorcerers, they were still little fellows who had yet to shed their shell, appearing to be incomparably immature in all aspects. Those above rank 5 were called gods in the world of gods, indicating that they had transcended the mortal world, breaking away from the cycle of life and death in the world, becoming an almost immortal life form. In the Magus faction, only those above rank 5 had the right to be called Great Magi. They were obviously completely different from the high, middle, and low-ranked Magi in the plane. This difference was reflected in all aspects, from the flesh to the mind, and then to the origin of the soul. Rank 5 Magi of Laws had completely adapted to the power of laws. Under the radiation of the power of laws, their bodies, inside and out, would become compatible with the power of laws they controlled. Take Grimm for example. When he was at rank 4, his human body was his original body, and his flame body was his elemental form. Now, however, it was the opposite. His flame form had become his true body, and his human body had become some sort of clone or projection. If not for the fact that he wanted to maintain this last trace of humanity, Grimm would not have left himself with such a weak and dangerous loophole. And this was actually a huge problem that all human Grand Magi faced. The human body was too weak, and the upper limit of the power it could contain was too low. If the great Magi stuck to their human bodies, the most direct consequence was that their energy reserves and basic defenses would be a mess. At least in the realm of rank 5 beings, the great Magi who stuck to the human tradition were the weakest. In the afternoon, the lava lake started to become restless. Light earthquakes shook the loose piles of boulders, and gravel rolled down from high places, forming some small landslides. The bottom of the lava lake seemed to have leaked. The dark red, viscous lava that flowed all year round started to seep downwards, and the water level of the lake quickly dropped, revealing a bed of lava that was burnt red. Large waves of heat surged out from the ground, bringing along small gravel to form pillars of air that soared into the sky. The temperature within the pillars reached 4 to 5,000 degrees. If a human were to fall into them, their flesh would instantly melt, and their bones would vaporize. Nothing would be left. The earth was like a muddy dragon that continuously dug its way into it. The ground undulated up and down and cracked like a piece of rag. The entire lava lake was filled with rumbling mud, and the waves of air filled the air. From afar, the entire earth was like a pot of boiling water that was about to boil. The Magi of the Magi of the Magi of the Magi were, and of the Magi of the Magi were waiting. The Magi of the Magi of the Magi of the Magi of Magi of the Magi. He of the Magi of the Magi, and he was wearing, and was, of a Winsal was wearing an exquisite knight's armor, which was engraved with intricate and complicated magical patterns. Behind him was a blood-red cloak that fluttered in the wind, accentuating his tall and straight figure. They hovered above the lava lake and looked down at the huge changes below them. As far as the eye could see, they could not find any intruders or suspicious creatures. The lava in the lava lake had already been drained, and the bed of lava that was burnt red was exposed. Waves of hot air rose from the bottom of the lake, and the air was filled with the smell of sulfur and heat. Master Winsal, it doesn't seem like something has happened in the outside world, but there's some movement underground. One of the Magi frowned and said in bewilderment, "Underground." Winsal muttered to himself. As a member of the Magi family, he naturally knew what was hidden beneath the lava lake. Now that there was some movement underground, could it be, while he was deep in thought, another Magi of the Magi of the Magi of the Magi of the Magi exclaimed in surprise. "Look, what's that?" Winsal was startled. He lowered his head and concentrated. As expected, he found some new abnormalities. On the dry and scorching rock bed, streaks of dark red, hazy light slowly seeped out, like the colorful tentacles of a giant octopus. They began to spread in all directions and into the sky. For some reason, Winsal's heart trembled when he saw these colorful streaks of light. Deep in his heart, he had an urge to turn around and run. The few rank 2 Magi might not be able to detect the abnormality of these colorful streaks of light, but as a rank 3 Blood Knight, Winsal already had a vague and illusory impression of high-tier power. His sharp intuition warned him to never go near these colorful streaks of light. Winsal hesitated for a moment before reaching into his storage pouch and taking out a fist-sized metal ore that was flashing with blue light. Then, he let go of it and let it fall silently. The metal ore spun as it fell. The magic power that was immersed in it even drew out faint blue threads in the air. Cobalt ore. It was a magical ore that was immersed in a strange water element. The extracted cobalt ore was a good material for crafting water element magic staff. This cobalt ore did not look big, but it was considered a mid-tier magic material. A fist-sized piece of it was worth at least 400 magic crystals in the market. Although the few Magi of the Magi did not understand, they still watched attentively. The cobalt ore spun as it fell from the sky, and coincidentally passed by one of the misty streaks of light. The moment the two collided in the sky, green smoke rose, and the ore immediately became as red as fire. The frighteningly high temperature vaporized the ore in an instant, and only bits of slag were left falling from the sky. Hiss! The few Magi of the Magi of the Magi of the Magi immediately took a deep breath, and their gazes towards the misty streaks of light were filled with fear. Although the cobalt ore did not prevent the growth of resistance, it was still much stronger than normal metals. Coupled with its special magical properties, it had no problem resisting normal elemental attacks. These seemingly harmless and light bands of light actually contained such terrifying power. If they were to be sucked into them, it would be impossible for them to die with a whole corpse. Go back immediately and inform the family headquarters of this abnormality. I'll go down and take a look myself. Since he was responsible for guarding this place, Winsal naturally had the responsibility to find out the source of the abnormality. Although there were many dangers below, he was duty-bound. He could only grit his teeth and go down to explore. However, just as he was about to move, a familiar female voice suddenly rang in his ears. "Come on up. There's no need to go down." It was Lady Mary. Winsal suddenly looked up. Only then did he discover that two graceful and perfect women were standing quietly in the sky beside the giant airship, looking down at the land below. And Lady Alice, with a wave of his hand, Winsal and a few scarlet magi flew into the sky and bowed to Mary and Alice before returning to the floating airship. "Inform the captain and have him take everyone to wait 100 miles away." Without orders, no one was allowed to step into the lava lake region. "Go." Mary hurriedly gave the order. In these 80 years, Mary had led the Scarlet family and also held the position of Vice-Dean of the Horton Academy of Witchcraft. Her prestige in the Central Continent was illustrious, and in the eyes of the Scarlet Magi, her authority was increasing day by day. Hence, in less than the time it took to eat a meal, the enormous floating airship had already disappeared into the horizon. Only two graceful and beautiful figures were left in the sky above the lava lake region. The bat wings on Mary's back flapped lightly in the air, causing her to sink and float in midair. All these years had passed, but Mary's beauty was still the same. She had a sharp and beautiful face, scarlet eyes that were like blood, bright and alluring red lips, shoulder-length crimson hair that was like fire, coupled with a slender waist and perky buttocks, slender and fair long legs. She wore a set of dragon skin soft armor that was enchanted with various witchcraft effects, perfectly fitting her curvy and exquisite body, giving others an even more soul-stirring and bewitching feeling of seduction. On the other hand, Alice seemed to be even more gentle, refined, and composed by his side. She was wrapped in a purple starry robe, and her figure was tall and graceful. Her silky silvery hair was draped over her back, making her face appear unusually gentle and peaceful. Her long and narrow phoenix eyes were a pair of azure blue eyes that flickered with intelligence, giving off a bewitching and mysterious feeling. The two women stood side by side, looking down at the undulating earth below them. Their brows and eyes were filled with a trace of concern and sorrow that could not be concealed. "Alice, you said, he will come out today?" Mary asked softly, but her tone did not contain the joy of reunion after a long time. "Yes." "He has already reached rank 5? "Yes." "Then he will leave the Magus world immediately?" "Not so soon, but there is not much time left for him." The two women were silent. Under their watchful eyes, the lava lake that had cooled down suddenly trembled violently once again. Fine cracks appeared on the ground like broken porcelain, and a blinding scarlet pillar of light shot out from the ground, as if there was a blazing sun rising from the ground. Everything on the surface began to melt and soften, and even the air was heated to a shocking degree. Chapter 1437. This was a 10-meter-tall golden flame giant. Although the 10-meter-tall figure was much smaller than its 1,000-meter-tall body in the past, the strange flames surrounding the flame giant were constantly overflowing with golden ripples. These golden ripples could not be seen by ordinary people at all, as they only existed in the void. Just like those special witchcraft halos, wherever the golden ripples went, the laws of the plane's void would change. The one controlling this plane was no longer the high and mighty plane's consciousness. Instead, it was another burning will that rose in its place, which was the sole consciousness of the golden flame giant. From a certain point of view, this golden flame giant had actually become the source of the power of laws. The power of laws contained in its body was constantly interacting with the Magus world's system of laws, communicating with it, causing the system to tremble and ripple. But how could the plane's consciousness be willing to lose control of this plane? Hence, around the golden flame giant, chains of laws suddenly extended from the void, like the tentacles of an octopus, and coiled around the giant's body. The golden flame giant was obviously unwilling to endure the restraints of the chains of laws. It roared and waved its hand, and a large area of space was instantly overturned by golden flames. In the sea of flames, the chains of laws shattered one by one, and even the void was burned until it was distorted. But how could the plane's consciousness be so easily defeated? In the next instant, a hole appeared in the void of the plane. More and denser law chains filled the sky and swept toward the golden giant. Wherever the chains of laws swept, the sea of flames that the golden flame giant had ignited was gradually suppressed. The golden flame giant roared in pain, and wanted to continue using its strength to resist the chains of laws. At this moment, a golden halo of destiny fell on the giant's body, temporarily delaying its resistance against the plane's consciousness. Grim, don't resist the plane's consciousness. If you want to stay in the plane for a while longer, you'll have to endure the suppression of the plane's consciousness. Trust me, you'll be fine. Alice's gentle and sweet voice sounded in the golden flame giant's mind, and only then did it stop its futile resistance. It gritted its teeth and endured the restraints of the chains of laws. After the giant gave up resisting, the rampaging chain of laws immediately coiled around its body, and then continuously tightened the noose. The golden flame giant was also howling in pain under the entanglement of the law chains. Its body was shrinking bit by bit, and the flames on its body were gradually extinguished. After a full quarter of an hour, the golden flame giant finally disappeared completely. In its place was a 2-meter-tall, naked, muscular man. Grim shook his head, gritted his teeth, and struggled to get up from the ground. The surface of his robust and tall male body was densely covered in profound and mysterious golden flame markings, and the surface of the markings was covered in a layer of dark green crisscrossing lines. It caused most of his strength to be in an extremely strange seal. Of course, this seal couldn't completely conceal his power. As long as he willed it, the power that erupted from his body could break the seal at any time, allowing the nomological power represented by the golden ripples to once again rule this space. However, in that case, there would be no end to his battle with the plane's consciousness. If he wasn't forced out of the plane's consciousness would not give up. After all, if a powerful magus of laws like him was allowed to roam freely in the plane's laws would be rewritten wherever he went. This was something the plane's consciousness would never allow. Most of Grim's power had been sealed after transforming from his body of flames to his current body of a human. The upper limit of his power was also restricted to the peak of grade 4, and it was only a small portion of his true power. It was no wonder that the great Magi could not tolerate such an uncomfortable situation. In his previous battles, he had personally killed 2 grade 5 creatures. This made his heart swell a little, and he felt that he was already very powerful. However, when he truly became a grade 5 magus, he personally experienced how cruel the suppression of the plane's laws was on super magi. This was practically an all-round suppression, from the body to the mind and even the soul. It was no wonder that those grade 5 lesser lords of disaster became so weak after entering the magus world. What was powerful was not Grim, but the omnipresent plane's consciousness, and the power of laws that he unexpectedly grasped in advance. It was these two coincidences that caused those grade 5 lesser lords of disaster to fail miserably, giving rise to Grim's moment of glory. What's the meaning of this? You're naked the moment we meet. The sharp-tongued Mary flapped her bat wings and could not help but exclaim as she descended from the sky. Beside her, Alice's cheeks were red, and her eyes were smiling. Grim smiled awkwardly, and with a wave of his hand, he condensed a soft red robe for himself and draped it over his body. However, where the golden flames shook, the surrounding void rippled, and it took a long time for it to calm down. This is the plane's interior, you. If it's not necessary, don't use the power of laws recklessly. Otherwise, the plane's backlash will make you feel very uncomfortable. Alice walked slowly to Grimm's side, standing on her tiptoes and gently brushing a strand of his dark red hair behind his back. Boo-hoo! It's so uncomfortable. It's like half my nostrils are blocked and my vision is blocked, and there are chains that weigh over 100 kilograms wrapped around my body. Even breathing is so difficult. Grimm complained madly, looking like he was about to die. After all, his physique could not compare to those of the lesser lords of disaster. The latter had to endure the even more terrifying suppression of the plane, yet they could still display their strength in the plane. Grimm, on the other hand, could barely maintain his strength at grade 4. This is because you've just advanced and you're not used to the suppression of the plane yet. Once you stay in the plane for a long time and get used to it, your strength will slowly increase. Alice explained to him in a simple and clear manner. Of course, Grimm already knew this, but he couldn't help but want to complain and get rid of this torture as soon as possible, even though every part of his body was in pain. You've already advanced? That golden fire giant is your main body? Mary had already circled around Grimm 3 times, inquiring curiously. She even moved closer to Grimm, lightly sniffing the sweet scent of his blood that refreshed the heart and refreshed the mind, saying in an intoxicated manner, "So fragrant! So fragrant, take a good bite." Grimm's handsome face revealed an expression that did not know whether to laugh or cry, and he stretched out a finger to lightly poke Mary's forehead. Only then did he wrap his arm around her waist, turning to ask Alice, "How much longer can I stay in the plane?" Alice smiled indifferently. "That depends on how much of the plane's favor you have left. If you don't leave the Magus world after using up all the favor, the plane's consciousness will find you sooner or later and force you out." Grimm looked within himself and immediately communicated with the AI chip. In the next second, a huge countdown alarm clock was projected in his mind. 123 hours 43 minutes 57 seconds. Time was ticking away. This was the last amount of time he could stay in the Magus world, and as he used power that exceeded the limits of this world, the time would rapidly shorten. Hence, there was not much time left for him to make arrangements for his funeral. AI chip, what's the status of my self-examination? Beep. Beginning first self-check after leveling up. Very soon, Grimm's basic stats flooded the screen like a waterfall. Grimm. Male. Rank 5 Magus of Laws. Fire Specialization. Astral Beast Bloodline 1. Devouring Devilfish. Astral Beast Bloodline 2, 4%. Chaotic Physique. Aj was Magic Resistance. Core of Laws. Law of Fire 217%. Stats: Strength 26, Vitality 35, Agility, Spirit 51 plus 5. Bloodline Talents: Energy Black Hole, Law of Fire, Inextinguishable Flames, Flaming Mirror Image. Almost 100 years of accumulation and the fact that Grimm had devoured part of Vulcan Renai's flames had allowed his analysis of the Law of Fire to rise to 217%, allowing him to successfully unlock the second ability of the Law of Fire, Flaming Mirror Image. When Grimm fought, he could summon 3 flaming mirror images in his sea of fire. They could replicate most of his fire abilities, and they also had powerful fire-casting abilities. More importantly, Grimm's main body could move freely within the 3 flaming mirror images, unaffected by the restrictions of the plane or spatial interference. This meant that Grimm's enemies would have to face the attacks of 4 powerful magi of Laws of Fire at the same time. If they wanted to attack Grimm's main body, they would have to destroy the 3 flaming mirror images first. Just the thought of that was enough to make one excited. Apart from the changes to the Law of Fire, Grimm had also started to analyze the second Astral Beast bloodline on top of his original transformation. Once the analysis of the second bloodline was complete, Grimm would have a second bloodline transformation ability. At that time, he would be able to adapt to the situation of the battle and choose a suitable combination of bloodline transformations, making his battle tactics even more dangerous and versatile. However, having so many bloodline transformations would affect his development as a magus. He would need time to slowly observe and adapt to it. Therefore, there was no need for him to worry about something as insubstantial as this. I still have some time. What do you think we should do next? Grim grabbed Alice's waist and whispered in her ear with ill intentions. Alice's face immediately turned red, while Mary, who was eavesdropping at the side, immediately jumped up in joy. All right. I've been holding it in for almost 100 years. I definitely won't let you off this time. Grim laughed heartily and grabbed the two girls' waists, before burrowing back underground in a flash. Chapter 1438. Silver Alliance, Prophet's Tower. Since the outbreak of the magic tide, the white-haired old master of the tower had been locked in the top floor of the tower, and day and night, he had been reading the mysterious scrolls stored in the Prophet's Tower over the past tens of thousands of years. As he flipped through the scrolls, he muttered a string of strange words, such as Three Kings and Retro. However, on this day, a young acolyte, Thornk, carefully walked into the old man's residence with a wooden tray in his hands. There were a few simple dishes on it, and he asked softly, "Teacher, it's time for you to eat." I'm not eating. Hurry up and take it away. Don't disturb my thoughts." The old master had changed from his usual wise and far-sighted appearance to one of irritation and anger. He waved his arms, wanting to chase Thornk out. Damn it. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Why do I not understand what's happening there? Alice. That Alice must have done something. These damned witches of fate, why do they always like to mess up fate? Just as he was slamming the wooden table, the silent prophet's eye above his head suddenly burst into a dazzling golden light, and then began to rotate with a rumbling sound, casting the golden light far away in a certain direction in the northwest. The wheel of fate is turning. Another great wizard has appeared in the Magus world. Quick, Thornk, help me up there. Who's so lucky? Let's see, is it the one from the Magus Association or the one from the Central Continent? Under the old master's incoherent urging, Thornk hurriedly put down the tray and helped his teacher along a narrow spiral staircase to the prophet's eye at the top of the tower. Here, the old master suddenly felt a burst of strength and threw Thornk aside. He pounced onto the altar and poured all of his spiritual force into the prophet's eye that was rotating like a precise machine. The prophet's eye was a huge hollow metal ball with a diameter of 2 meters. It floated above the altar. At the center of the metal ball was a strange eye. It had a pupil, sclera, and bloody lines. It spun around chaotically, appearing abnormally agile. This wasn't a witchcraft eye, but the eye of a true super creature. With the help of this super creature's eyeball, the prophet's tower could cross thousands of miles, penetrate any witchcraft barrier, and see what it wanted to see. However, even the most powerful psionic eyes could not see through the fog formed by the power of destiny. Therefore, the one that a prophet hated the most was none other than another prophet. The fog of destiny. Damn it. It's indeed that Alice's aura. But judging from the environment, this should be the Central Continent. Then, the one who advanced this time must be that legendary fire wizard. Ha ha. Even Douglas can't do anything to this fire wizard. Could he really replicate the legend of the 3 ancient kings? It had to be said that those who were tainted by the aura of fate divination were all a little neurotic. The old tower master, who had lived for nearly 1,000 years, was now speaking incoherently like a madman. He peeped into the distance with the help of the prophet's eye while muttering some words and phrases that no one could understand. 3 ancient kings, Thornk was puzzled, but the archaic word caught his attention. When he flipped through the ancient secret scrolls countless times, this word appeared the most frequently in ancient times. The 3 ancient kings referred to the 3 powerhouses who founded the 3 great sorcerer organizations of the sorcerer world in ancient times. One of them was the founder of the Northern Witches, Salem, who was known as the Witch Queen, Queen of Witches, and Ancient Witch. The other one was Ignatsu, who was said to have grasped the law of the earth and was the first president of the Sorcerer Association. The last one was an arcane sorcerer, Patrick, who was also known as the Creator. He was also the founder of the Silver Alliance. They were the only 3 great Grade 9 sorcerers in the Sorcerer faction, which was why they were known as the 3 Ancient Kings. His teacher was actually comparing a newbie, who had just advanced to Grade 5 with the 3 Ancient Kings. This was beyond Thornk's understanding. After all, Grade 9 represented the strongest power in the multiverse. They had long since surpassed the laws of the universe and were great existences that ordinary sorcerers could never hope to reach. Therefore, the old Tower Master's current behavior was equivalent to a blasphemy against the 3 Ancient Kings. If the people from the 3 sorcerer organizations heard this, it would probably cause a lot of trouble. However, this was the Prophet's Tower, the territory of the old Tower Master. No one dared to challenge his authority under the gaze of the Prophet's eye. After all, living long also represented a kind of power. Sorcerer Association, Overlook Tower. Level 777. The tower's top floor, which was usually deserted, was now crowded with people. The Tier 4 sorcerers, who were usually so busy that not even their shadows could be seen, were now clustered around the new first prophet, Nostradamus, anxiously waiting for news. 7 hours ago, the rhythm of the laws that came from the depths of the plane system alarmed everyone. Although they did not know where the source of the law rhythm was, they could vaguely feel that something earth-shattering was about to happen in the sorcerer world. Sorcerers below Grade 4 were not closely connected to the plane system. Even if they were alarmed, they would not be able to correct themselves. However, these Grade 4 sorcerers could vaguely feel something through the law power they had mastered. In order to clear their doubts, they put down what they were doing and went to the top floor of the Overlook Tower to seek confirmation from the new first prophet, Nostradamus, who had been in office for less than 100 years. As for the previous prophet, Mustana, he had already exhausted all his efforts in a prophecy 78 years ago and died on the astrology platform. This Nostradamus was an elite selected from the backup prophets by Domnall. He was promoted to the current position in one go. The bright starlight on the astrology platform had been shining for a full 2 hours. Only then did Prophet Nostradamus weakly walk down with the help of a few female acolytes. As the leader of the association, Domnall was the first to stand up and ask in a deep voice, "How is it? Has it been confirmed?" Facing this old sorcerer who had the power to decide his life and death, Nostradamus did not dare to be negligent. He shook off the 2 female acolytes and rushed to the old sorcerer. He bowed and said, "It's been confirmed. It's him." Domnall took a deep breath. The people behind him were even more silent. For the Sorcerer Association, a Grade 5 great sorcerer was not a threat to them. However, a great sorcerer who still remained in the sorcerer world was terrifying. If Grimm risked a little bit of the plane's backlash and came to the east to wreak havoc, the entire Sorcerer Association would probably tremble in fear. Among the crowd, Savorius's expression was especially ugly. Although Gloria was slightly calmer than him, the flickering light in her purple eyes showed that she was not as calm as she looked on the surface. In terms of hatred, she and Savorius were probably the most hated by Grimm in the association. Although they belonged to 2 different camps at that time, and they were both working for their respective masters, after fighting 2 battles, this hatred had risen to the level of personal grievances. Now that Grimm had become a great sorcerer, although he would be expelled from the plane sooner or later, the short period of time before he left was enough for him to do whatever he wanted. If, just as everyone was discussing and digesting the news, the Overlook Tower suddenly trembled, and alarms sounded everywhere. "Warning! Warning! Enemy invasion! Target has been locked!" Tower Spirit Raphatus's ear-piercing voice echoed in the hall. Who is it?" I need images from the outside. Domhnall roared and slammed the wizard's staff in his hand. Immediately, a wall in the hall turned into a water mirror, showing the scene outside the wizard's pagoda. The towering Overlook Tower was now fully armed. Layers of airtight force field barriers covered all the entrances, skylights, and platforms, while an even larger semicircular barrier protected the entire tower and the surrounding wizard facilities. The attack from the outside had also triggered the defense mechanism of the Overlook Tower. The rune stones that were constantly hovering around the tower had all been activated, lighting up the defensive spell formations and offensive spell formations on them. They drew mysterious trajectories in the air and began to move toward the location of the attack. Somewhere in the tower, a hidden door opened, and nearly 100 wizard apprentices riding high-level wizard beasts flew into the sky. They were all wearing specially made rune armor and holding rune crossbows, the magical glow on them clearly visible under the sunlight. On the ground, the bunkers hidden around the wizard's pagoda suddenly opened, and thousands of armored giant rhinoceroses and rune knights riding on them with special spears in their hands rushed out. As for the wizards of the association, who did not know what was going on, they all fled to the nearest wizard facilities after hearing the ear-piercing alarm. In the blink of an eye, the surroundings of the Overlook Tower became empty and quiet. All the wizards of the association who were hiding opened their eyes wide and scanned the sky. They wanted to see who dared to cause trouble in the holy land of the wizards. However, what surprised them was that there was no army or giant beast. There was only a young wizard in a red robe floating in the empty sky. Apart from him, there was no other enemy. Just as the wizards of the low and mid-level association relaxed, the level 4 wizards gathered at the top of the wizard's pagoda and staring intently at the magic mirror could not help but feel their hearts tighten. Chapter 1439. In the sky 5 miles away from the Overlook Tower, Grimm stood proudly, looking at the wizard tower in front of him with a cold expression. The defense mechanism of the wizard's tower had left an indelible impression on him the last time he visited. But now that he had advanced to level 5 and was about to leave the wizard world, he had nothing to worry about anymore. He just wanted to vent the anger that had accumulated in his heart for hundreds of years. Domhnall froze on the spot, his lips trembling slightly, but he did not give any orders. Even though they did not receive any orders from the higher-ups, the wizards that rushed into the sky still gathered in groups according to the internal defense mechanism and charged toward the strange enemy. 5 miles, 4 miles, 3 miles, another 100 meters, and they would be in the best shooting range of the god-destroying crossbows. All the members of the God of Destruction team held their breaths, holding their crossbows and silently estimating the distance. However, their realization came to an abrupt halt at this moment. Grimm let out a muffled groan. He did not shout or cast a spell. He did not even cast any magic light unique to elemental spells, but the members of the God of Destruction team and their flying wizard beasts that were 3 miles away spontaneously combusted. Unstoppable golden flames gushed out of their souls and rushed out of their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. They were like candles thrown into an oven, melting into a pile of unrecognizable mud in an instant. Then they turned into smoke and disappeared without a trace. A team of 78 wizards that had gone through special training and could skillfully control the god-destroying crossbows were more than enough to kill those unprepared level 3 wizards. Even level 4 wizards would have a high chance of dying if they were surrounded by the god-destroying crossbows. Unfortunately, such a team was tragically annihilated without even knowing what method the enemy had used. The wizards that were charging at high speed on the ground stopped their mounts and looked at the lone figure standing proudly in the sky in shock. Beside them, a black mass of flying wizard beasts rushed into the sky like a tidal wave, turning into several attack arrows and pouncing toward the enemy. In the sky, a rune stone that was closest to the enemy had already moved to the attack point. The runes on the runestone were all lit up, and violent magic energy was injected into it from afar. Then, it turned into a 5-meter-thick lightning bolt that fell from the sky and struck the opponent. Grim didn't even raise his head as a strange book-shaped artifact appeared above his head. It propped up a transparent eggshell and protected him inside. The violent lightning and the book-type divine artifact collided in midair, bursting out blinding light and drifting plasma like raindrops. This ferocious and violent strike still caused a few creases on the eggshell-like protective barrier, but the electric plasma that splashed in all directions didn't even cause a ripple. After the violent lightning strike, the book-type divine artifact quickly returned to normal. There were no signs of damage or disturbance on the surface at all. Everyone in the wizard's pagoda gasped. That swift attack just now had an attack power of 9,000 degrees, which was already comparable to a pinnacle Tier 4 Magus. Yet, it didn't even leave a scratch on his opponent's skin. The defensive power of his opponent's wizard artifact was obvious. When Grim was at level 4, he was like a calf trying to pull a level 5 divine artifact. It was difficult for him to unleash the full power of the level-surpassing divine artifact. But now, with the increase in his strength, the true power of the level 5 divine artifact could be fully unleashed. Since he had come here to vent his anger, Grim naturally wouldn't just take a beating without retaliating. Looking at the purple-green runestones that were 12 meters tall and 5 meters wide slowly moving toward them, forming a dazzling energy chain with the wizard's pagoda, as if they were going to unleash their power together, Grim let out a cold laugh. He opened his mouth slightly and spat out a strange, almost transparent stream of flames toward the few runestones closest to him. When the stream of flames left his mouth, it was only an extremely weak stream of air, but when it flew dozens of meters away and absorbed the fire elements drifting in the air, it actually turned into a terrifying stream of crimson flames that was nearly 100 meters long in the blink of an eye. The stream of flames blew on the runestones without any obstructions. The energy barrier that was shot out only lasted for half a second before exploding. Thus, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the runestone that had magical defensive power comparable to a small wizard's pagoda turned red in the blink of an eye. Then, the side of the runestone that was being roasted by the stream of flames quickly melted, turning into a pool of red-hot lava that dripped down from the sky. Once there was one, there was a second, a third. These were high-level runestones that were usually equipped with a large number of offensive and defensive spell formations, and were made of extremely sturdy anti-magic materials. Each of them was worth more than 1,000,000 magic crystals. However, at this moment, in front of everyone, it melted like a candle. Seeing this, Domnor felt as if his heart was bleeding. He quickly took out his magic communication wand and quickly gave the order to stop the battle. Thus, the group of wizard beasts that were about to reach within 1,000 meters of Grim stopped in their tracks and returned to the ground according to the instructions of the wizards. In the next second, Domnor's old and stooped figure appeared outside the wizard's pagoda, facing off against Grim with the meter-thick elemental barrier between them. Grim. Sir, I didn't expect you to advance to level 5 so quickly. May I know why you have come? Domnor asked knowingly. As for the runestone that was destroyed and the members of the God of Destruction team that died tragically, he did not even mention it. Haha, I have advanced to level 5. Before I leave, I want to take a walk here and visit a few old friends. I wonder if Sir Domnor can help me pass a message to them? Grim did not need to hide his true nature at this point. It was as if he was looking for revenge. The muscles on Domnor's face twitched slightly as he asked with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "Oh, who would Sir Grim like to visit? Gria and Savoris." Grim sneered. "These two have given me a lot of trouble in the past. Now that I have the chance, I naturally want to repay them." "Hee, that's not a good time." Domnor also sneered. "Both of them have gone to the depths of the galaxy and are not in the association for the time being. If Sir Grim wants to find them, why don't you take a look outside the galaxy?" Grim looked at the stubborn Domnor with a cold glint flashing in his eyes. He slowly flew to the elemental barrier, extended his right index finger, and gathered a red halo on his fingertip. He drew a circle on the transparent barrier, then bent his finger and tapped it. Bam! The elemental barrier in the circle exploded into scattered fireflies, causing her and Domner's eyes to meet each other without any obstruction. What superb elemental control skills! To be able to shatter part of the elemental barrier without damaging the rest was a testament to Wizard Grimm's superior control of magical elements. Domner was slightly startled, but he still calmly and coldly stared back at Grimm. He knew that Grimm would not dare to kill him. After all, Grimm still had many trusted aides and subordinates in the Central Continent. If he really fell out with the Magus Association, it would be hard to guarantee that the Magus Association would not kill the Crimson family after he left the Magus world. Therefore, he was sure that Grimm would not dare to kill him. However, the scene of him being bullied in front of him was really unbearable. Grimm stared at him coldly for a moment, then suddenly smiled. If you say they're not here, then they're not here. I naturally trust them. Anyway, I still have a lot of enemies, so I'll go take a look elsewhere. Remember, say hello to them for me, and tell them to be careful when they go out in the future. As soon as he finished speaking, Grimm's entire body turned into a red line, and he instantly escaped tens of miles away. Then, a violent ring of flames spread out, and he instantly teleported another tens of miles away. Relying on these continuous leaps of flames, Grimm flew all the way north, straight toward the territory of the Northern Witches. The ring of flames that he had sprinkled down halfway had instantly turned the land within a radius of 3 miles into a barren, scorched land. Not even a single blade of grass could grow. When the flames were extinguished, a giant flame mark was left on the ground. Seeing this, Domner's face turned green, then white. He then sighed, and only turned around to return to the Wizard's Pagoda after a long time. This Grimm was obviously here to establish his authority, and also to issue a stern warning to the Magus Association. Seeing Domner walk into the hall with a shaky gait, the various Tier 4 Association's members gathered around him and comforted him with warm words. Savorius seemed to know that the danger was over, and he once again started to clamor. Domner, we can't take this lying down. Don't worry, I'll go to the Central Continent and cause a ruckus. I won't come back until I beat up all the level 4 magi. Shut up! Shut up! For some reason, Domner and Gloria yelled at him at the same time. Being reprimanded by the two, Savorius's expression also became a little embarrassed. He said angrily, "What are you doing? Aren't I also standing up for the association? Why are you getting angry at me?" Domner ignored him, instead turning to look at Nostradan. He said sternly, "How long do you think he can stay in the dimension?" Nostradan was sweating profusely as he deduced for a moment, then carefully replied, "Shouldn't be more than 3 days." Domner narrowed his eyes slightly and said quietly, 3 days? This is enough time for him to run to the north. Why don't we? Gloria frowned. Let's inform the north and get them to prepare? Why should we inform them? Domner said coldly. Our association has lost so much face. If the other 2 organizations are safe, I won't be able to sleep in the future. I want to see what that Grimm can do in the northern lands. He then turned to the crowd and said, "In the future, try not to have any conflicts with the Central Continent. I have a feeling that this Grimm still has something up his sleeve. Whoever dares to run into the muzzle of his gun and cause a huge mess, the association will not help you clean up after you." Domner stared coldly at Savorius, as if these words were specifically directed at him. Chapter 1440. Northern Lands, Howling Plains. This was the Cold Wind Nation, the oldest direct territory of the Illusory Witches, and also the location of the Origin Wizard's Pagoda. Over the past thousands of years, the Illusory Witches had undoubtedly been the most antisocial group of people in the entire northern land. They had always preferred to be alone. They rarely interacted with the outside world, and their training and inheritance had always been mysterious. Thus, the Howling Plains had become an extremely desolate witches' territory that was rarely visited by humans. But today, the Wizard's Pagoda, standing silently in the middle of the Howling Plains, had become unusually lively and noisy. It could even be said to be in dire straits, because an enemy had arrived. To be honest, no one had dared to cause trouble in the territory of the Northern Witches in the past thousands of years. Therefore, many Northern Witches were confused when they received the message for help from the Illusory Witches. They were even more baffled. Many Level 4 witches emerged from their respective laboratories or secondary planes, flocking to the Howling Plains in groups of 3 to 5. But before they could even get close to the battlefield, they could already feel a scorching aura assaulting their faces. Battlefield. The Howling Plains had already become a battlefield. It was late at night. The night sky of the Howling Plains was already burning. Large masses of red clouds covered the horizon, illuminating most of the sky in a dark red. There seemed to be a terrifying demon hidden in the rolling red clouds. It was roaring and releasing a large number of meteors that bombarded the wizard tower that stood alone. The wizard's tower was trembling. The elemental barriers that surrounded the tower were stacked one after another, and they relied on the layers of elemental protection to block the red fireballs that were falling down rapidly. But the ferocious force of the fireballs also shook the wizard's pagoda, causing it to tremble under the continuous bombardment of fireballs. The wizard's pagoda was not just for defense. The body of the wizard's pagoda was surging with terrifying energy. Every time the wizard energy gathered to a certain extent, it would turn into a terrifying wizard spell formation and launch a counterattack against the enemy. But what was strange was that no matter how the wizard's pagoda attacked, the wizard's spells would disappear silently once they entered the red cloud. It was as if there was a Tautai monster there that could devour everything, swallowing all of the attacks. Left without a choice, the witch in charge of the wizard pagoda could only disperse the offensive wizard spells and cast a large number of dispelling wizard spells instead. She wanted to break apart the fire cloud to see who the real enemy was. Unfortunately, the dispel spell that rained down from the sky didn't have any effect. The red cloud was still churning there, releasing a deafening rumble of the elements. Then, a large ball of fire rain descended from the sky along with ferocious fire meteors, destroying the wizard's pagoda and the surrounding land beyond recognition. If it had been in the past, the high-level witches guarding the Origin Wizard Tower would have led their subordinates and charged out to fight the enemy to the death. But today, these hypocritical witches were unusually low-profile and forbearing. Even though the Origin Wizard Pagoda had been shaken, they refused to reveal themselves. As the hypocritical witch's Origin Tower, it actually had the ability to transform the entire Howling Plains into an alternate illusion. But it was also very strange. The hypocritical witches seemed to have forgotten this ability, and they still hadn't tried to pull the enemy into the illusion. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but they really didn't dare. The leader of the witches hiding in the wizard's pagoda already knew who the enemy in the red cloud was. She didn't want to embarrass herself in front of a true level 5 wizard. Thus, the only thing she could do now was to endure bitterly until the legendary fire wizard was chased out of the wizard world. The sound of wind and thunder suddenly came from the distant horizon. The dark clouds in the sky were suppressed by a wild aura that could topple the mountains and overturn the seas, and they started piling toward the Howling Plains. When the dark clouds were piled up like a thick cotton candy, a resonant and sonorous dragon roar echoed out, and the dark clouds dispersed. The zombie dragon Arteus' powerful and ferocious huge body suddenly appeared in their field of vision. The person on the back of the zombie dragon was naturally the leader of the Death Witches, Thuna. She hadn't arrived yet, but a clear, thunderous roar had already arrived. "Grim, what exactly do you want to do? This is the Northern Lands, and you can't behave atrociously here." In another direction, ghostly cries filled the sky. two powerful witches, one black and one white, with completely different appearances and clothes, floated over, stopping far away at the edge of the red cloud's shroud. It was the other super expert of the northern lands, the leader of the Pale Witches, Sylvia. There were a total of 2 super experts among the northern witches, and both of them had already arrived. At the periphery of the battlefield, one could still sense the dazzling soul light. It could be said that all the slightly famous high-level witches in the northern lands were present, but they didn't show themselves because of Thuna's orders. The red cloud parted, revealing a young and handsome wizard. He was 2 meters tall, and his body was tall and muscular. He was wrapped in a dark red wizard robe, but no magical light could be seen on it. It seemed to be just an ordinary robe. The northern witches were all too familiar with this face and figure. It was the legendary fire wizard Grimm, who had turned the entire sorcerer world upside down in the past few hundred years. Grimm revealed himself and looked at Thuna coldly. "Thuna, is this how you greet a superior wizard?" Thuna's body stiffened, and a trace of embarrassment flashed across her delicate and cold face. Finally, she lowered her head, put her hand on her chest, and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, great wizard Grimm." Sylvia, who was standing at the edge of the battlefield and watching from afar, was also embarrassed. She could only bow together with her original spirit and greet Grimm. It couldn't be helped. The sorcerer faction had always distinguished the nobles by their greetings. Those who were one level above them were considered inferior. If they did not show proper etiquette when meeting a superior wizard, the other party would use this as an excuse to punish them. Even their backers would be powerless to do anything about it. "Since you know what's good for you, step back. I still have some old debts to settle with this deceit witch," Grimm said sternly. Thuna suddenly straightened her body and said coldly, "Grimm? Sir, although you are now a grade 5 great wizard, don't forget that we, the northern witches, also have a backer." "Oh, are you threatening me?" "I wouldn't dare. I just want to remind you that you'll have to go to the outer galaxy sooner or later. If you cause too much trouble here, you won't be able to explain yourself when you meet my lords." "Explain? What do I need to explain? That bitch ambushed me once. If I wasn't lucky enough to escape her dream kill, do you think I'd still be standing here?" Grimm sneered. "Now that I'm back for revenge, do you think your lords have the right to stop me?" Thuna suddenly fell silent. In this world, the strong were always respected, and all the words were in the hands of those in power. Now that Grimm was a grade 5 great wizard, he was one of the few people in power in the sorcerer faction. Just like he said, even if the great witches were here, they could not ignore the power of a great wizard to exact revenge. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Thuna took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Maybe there's some misunderstanding. Lord, if you're willing to let Ivana go, we northern witches are willing. I don't lack resources. I just want to meet the person who dared to ambush me. Why, you don't even dare to show yourself." Grimm aimed the last sentence directly at the wizard's pagoda, and the rolling sound waves blasted the origin wizard's pagoda, causing sparks to fly everywhere. Layer after layer of the protective force field was shattered. What was even more terrifying was that wherever Grimm's will extended, even the laws of the dimension in this area would tremble and distort. If he wanted to, he could even cut off the mental connection between the surrounding grade 4 elemental wizards and this world. Of course, doing so would undoubtedly cause him to suffer a huge backlash from the dimension. However, in the area where his will ran rampant, even the laws of the dimension would be controlled and rewritten by him. Any wizard of a lower level than him would no longer be able to connect with the laws of the upper dimension to increase the power of their own elemental powers. Grimm had once made a simple assessment. Within the law domain where his will extended, elemental wizards would be affected the most, and their power would be reduced by at least half. Bloodline wizards would be affected second, and their combat power would also be reduced by 20 to 30%. Only body-honing wizards would be affected the least, and their power would be reduced by less than 10%. Hence, it could be said that the suppression of a law-defying wizard over an elemental or law wizard was fundamental, comprehensive, and irresistible. As if sensing Grimm's determination, the figure of a scrawny woman appeared on a small platform at the top of the wizard's pagoda. What an ugly and decrepit witch she was! Her appearance was like that of a skinned toad. Her exposed skin had completely festered and was covered in green smoke and blisters of various sizes. Her once beautiful face had disappeared, and what was left was a terrifying face full of holes, as if acid had been splashed on it. Grimm was also startled. If not for the soul aura in her body, he might have thought that she was an impostor. Ivana, what happened to you? Thona had not seen her for a long time, and she was shocked to see her in such a state. Everyone present was a high-level wizard, and they could naturally tell that this was not an external injury, but a real mental poison. It seemed like this mental poison had been bothering her for a long time, and it had already seeped into her soul, causing her to emit an aura of despair from the inside out, from her body to her soul. It's because of that battle that I've become like this. Ivana's body trembled as she shrieked, "Isn't the pain I've suffered for the past 100 years enough to make up for my past mistakes? It's more like it if you add this," Grimm snorted, and a ray of red light penetrated many magical defenses and landed on Ivana's body, turning into a halo and fusing with her. Ivana immediately screamed in pain. Burning will, if there was no great wizard to help her expel this burning will, it would flare up every 10 hours, and it would only stop after Ivana's blood boiled. Chapter 1441. After punishing Ivana, Grimm felt much better. Chip, how much time do I have? Beep. Countdown to expulsion. 11 minutes and 28 seconds, hiss. Only 11 minutes left. Grimm's heart trembled, a strange emotion welling up in his heart. I'm finally leaving this familiar world. At the moment of parting, there was a sense of reluctance and hesitation. He turned around and glanced at the northern witches, who were staring at him with all kinds of unfriendly eyes. He gently waved his hand in front of him and tore a small crack in the void. He lowered his head and entered it. When he reappeared, he had returned to the wizard's pagoda in the Crimson Wing. The hall was filled with crimson wizards who had come from all directions. They silently looked at Grimm, who had suddenly appeared, and bowed in unison, bidding their final farewell to the legendary leader. Grimm stood in midair, his gaze sweeping across them. There was a hint of reluctance in his eyes. Out of so many crimson wizards, he could only recognize 11 of them. Even among the Crimson Elders, that he knew, many familiar faces had disappeared, replaced by many new ones. His departure meant that he would be gone forever. Perhaps the next time he was lucky enough to project his soul back, there would be only a few familiar faces left. However, this was the norm for the great wizard. Even Meryl, a female disciple that he had personally nurtured, would only have a lifespan of 600 to 700 years if she was unable to advance to level 4. This short lifespan was only a small portion of Grimm's long lifespan. Perhaps by the time Grimm had settled down in the foreign lands and turned his attention back, she would have already disappeared. Because they did not want to give and lose too often, the great wizards were used to using coldness and rationality to control their emotions. They placed extravagant things like love, kinship, and friendship on the shelf. This was not because they were cold and heartless, but because they were in different dimensions. It was difficult for them to maintain their relationship like a normal family. After looking around the hall, Grimm's gaze pierced through the stone walls and the protection of the wizard's pagoda, landing at the end of the horizon. Over there, the Type 4 divine warriors of the central continent stood silently, gazing at the blazing will that stood proudly in the sky with complicated expressions. Although Grimm was leaving, the development of the Horton Witchcraft Academy was unstoppable. As long as the Crimson family was rooted in the academy, with Grimm's influence, they would be able to develop and grow for the next few hundred years. Moreover, there were still Mary and Alice left in the family. With them taking care of the family, the development of the family and the academy wouldn't deviate too much. Therefore, after nodding to everyone present and not present, Grimm's gaze swept over Mary, who was standing at the forefront. Finally, he turned around and entered the ultra-long-distance teleportation formation that connected to the outer realm. Wait for me there for a few hundred years. I will find you. Before the figure disappeared, Mary's slightly hoarse voice was directly transmitted into Grimm's ears. Grimm smiled cheerfully and immediately felt much more relaxed. Light and shadow changed, and time and space shook. After a moment of dizziness, Grimm's vision blurred, and he appeared in a teleportation formation. This was a teleportation room made of pure steel magic machinery. The interior was about 1,000 square meters, and the teleportation formation only took up a small part of the space. At this moment, the cloned brain sock was waiting respectfully outside the teleportation formation with a flattering smile on his face. "Welcome, Master." Grimm didn't pay attention to him, and he quietly relaxed his spiritual will. In the plane, he felt as if his hands and feet were tied up, and his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose were blocked. It was extremely uncomfortable. He had to restrain his strength in every move to prevent the plane's consciousness from suppressing him. Now that he was in the outer realm, his body and soul were no longer restrained, and he could finally relax and expand as he pleased. That kind of freedom made him feel intoxicated, and he almost forgot himself. After fusing his grade 5 spiritual will and rule power, it formed a unique will. His thoughts, words, and actions seemed to follow some kind of law, and it could condense the will of the rule in the area that his consciousness extended to, replacing the laws of the plane. His thoughts were the law, and his will was the rule of the world. In the space controlled by his rules, all spiritual will had to obey his will. This feeling of controlling the world like a god made Grimm intoxicated for half an hour, and only then did he slowly restrain himself. Just now, Grimm's consciousness had turned into a huge net that extended in every direction. It extended out of the teleportation room and into every nook and cranny of the City of Steel, as well as all kinds of tunnels and pipes. During this period, it had also clashed with the spiritual will of the heterotopic brain, Gaz-Lu. The latter had recognized Grimm's spiritual undulations and automatically retreated, which was equivalent to handing over control of the Steel City. Grimm just stood in the teleportation room without moving, and in the blink of an eye, he had explored the Steel City that spanned several dozen kilometers, including 103 floors above ground and 70 floors below ground. Even many hidden passages and spaces were scanned by Grimm's spiritual undulations, projected into the three-dimensional map in his mind. It had to be said that while Grimm's attention was focused on the interior of the plane, the heterotopic brain he had sent to the Wildlands was developing well. That was because he had discovered thousands of extraterrestrial beings and astral wanderers living in the 100-odd floors above ground. Inside the city, Grimm had also discovered auction halls, amusement parks, casinos, taverns, inns, blacksmiths, enchantment factories, alchemy laboratories, magic equipment recycling workshops, and many other strange places. It seemed that in the 200 years he had not noticed, the Steel City had really become a city outside the realm, a huge camp where many alien races and astral citizens rested, resupplied, and exchanged information. The reason the heterotopic brain Gaz-Lu was able to support such a huge city outside the realm was not by itself, but by a regular army of 6,000, as well as a reserve army of 13,000 hidden deep underground. Maintaining the 6,000 regular army was probably the limit of the heterotopic brain Gaz-Lu's control. Otherwise, it would not have let so many of them hibernate underground. The teleportation room was 5 floors below ground, while the heterotopic brain Gaz-Lu's residence was 50 floors below ground. From here to there, it could be said that there were many mechanisms and traps everywhere. Many areas and mountain passes were guarded by high-level magic equipment guards. It could be said that the gates were tightly guarded and airtight. After grasping the situation in an instant, Grimm slowly retracted his spiritual power, leaving the actual control of the Steel City to the heterotopic brain, Gaz-Lo. "Take me to see Gaz-Lo," Grimm said calmly. With the strength of his and the heterotopic brain's spiritual undulations, as long as they were in the Steel City, they could communicate with each other anytime and anywhere. However, long-distance communication was one thing, and face-to-face communication was another. That was why Grimm did not hesitate to meet the heterotopic brain. As if he was not surprised or hesitant about Grimm's request, the cloned brain sock quickly stepped aside and said, "Master, please come with me." In front of him, 10 high-level magic equipment guards opened the way, and the cloned brain sock led the way. Grimm passed through one spacious and flat steel passage after another, passing through one metal entrance after another heavily guarded by the magic equipment guards, and went through one metal gate after another that was several meters thick. Only then did he see the heterotopic brain, Gaz-Lo, at the 50 floors below ground. Compared to the last time they met, the volume of Gaz-Lo's brain had doubled. The brain floating in the aquamarine nutrient solution looked like a soft mountain of flesh. It was hard to imagine that it was the brain of a super-intelligent being. Seeing Gaz-Lo, Grimm finally revealed a smile on his face. Since the other party was willing to let him enter his brain chamber, it meant that the other party's mind and force field had not changed, and he was still willing to take him as his master. That was especially important. Although Grimm could still feel the flame brand that he had planted in Gaz-Lo's brain, he knew in his heart that this method could not completely restrain the other party. Such a method would not be able to completely restrain the other party. Knowing that Grimm was willing, it wasn't impossible for him to give up a part of his brain and remove Grimm's soul brand. Even now, the other party was still willing to serve him as her master and expose her weakest spot in front of him. This also showed her sincerity. Of course, Grimm would gladly accept it. "Master, I didn't expect you to move so quickly. You're already at grade 5 now." Gaz-Ruvi's majestic voice resounded in Grimm's mind, filled with endless emotions. When they first met, Gaz-Ruvi used the eternal ritual to become a grade 3 brain monster. At that time, Grimm was just an inconspicuous human tier 2 sorcerer. But now, although Gaz-Ruvi was several times stronger than before, he was still stuck at the pinnacle of grade 3 and had yet to advance to grade 4. On the other hand, its previous tier 2 master had already left it in the dust, becoming a noble and revered tier 5 great sorcerer. This earth-shattering change was hard for an alien like Gaz-Ruvi to accept, and he even began to doubt his own intelligence and ability. Moreover, Gaz-Ruvi could feel 2 extremely powerful auras from this young master. This meant that he had at least 2 grade 5 items on him. Strength might have been obtained through luck, but grade 5 items were not something that could be obtained easily. Chapter 1442. Grimm slept soundly in Steel City. In truth, with the vitality and spiritual force of a great rank 5 magus, even if he did not sleep for decades, he would not feel the slightest bit tired. However, this time, he had to lie down and rest. There was no other reason. His immense spiritual force needed to adapt to his current body, and this would undoubtedly require a certain amount of time. In Grimm's mind, the AI chip projected the time he needed to adapt: 11 years, 3 months, and 8 days. And this was even with the help of the AI chip. From a certain point of view, the current Grimm was comparable to those dragons that only knew how to sleep and eat. A short nap could last the entire life of some races. Hence, in a secret room in the 60th underground level of Steel City, Grimm fell into a deep sleep, leaving only the AI chip to loyally guard him. And this sleep lasted for 11 years. Beep, with the sound of the AI chip's alarm, Grimm's consciousness trembled slightly, and his dormant consciousness slowly but persistently awakened. Without considering the bonus attributes of the two artifacts, Grimm's spirit had reached 50 points. Compared to the 49 points of spiritual force of peak rank 4 Magi, Grimm's was only 1 point higher. However, this 1 point difference was the key to turning stone into gold. When one's strength reached the higher ranks, almost every increase in spiritual force would provide an exponential boost to one's battle prowess. And this 1 point of mental power was equivalent to the total strength of the previous 49 points of mental power. This meant that from now on, any slight increase in Grimm's main attributes would greatly increase his battle prowess. However, this also showed how difficult it was to increase one's main attribute. If it was an ordinary newbie, it would be extremely rare to find magic accessories and defensive equipment at rank 4 that could be extended to rank 5. Take the 2 rank 5 divine weapons that Grimm currently had, for example. At rank 4, they could increase Grimm's main attributes by 5 points. Now that Grimm had advanced to rank 5, they had increased his spiritual force to 2 points. However, even if it was only 2 points, it was still a huge help to Grimm. It was enough to allow a newbie like him to immediately surpass those seniors who had advanced within 1,000 years. Of course, compared to his 52 points of spirit, Grimm's other attributes were terrible. The only attribute that exceeded 30 points was his constitution. Furthermore, this was the result of Grimm obtaining the Star Beast's bloodline and gaining a portion of his constitution. Otherwise, most new rank 5 wizards would only have stats below 20 in strength, vitality, and dexterity. As a law-defying wizard, Grimm's fighting style was mainly long-range fire spells. He rarely thought about close combat. But considering that most of his enemies would have outstanding magic resistance in the future, a simple specialization in one element could easily put him in some kind of awkward situation. Therefore, he tried his best to improve the overall quality of his body so that he wouldn't have so many shortcomings. At the same time, he worked hard to study the advanced usage of the flame rule to make his attacks sharper and harder to defend against. This was what he should have done in his first few hundred years in the Outer Realms. As for exploring the Outer Realms, searching for resources, and searching for knowledge, they could only be carried out after their combat strength was fully integrated. According to Grimm's information, there were more than 10 rank 5 Magi in the Exodar camp where he and Steel City were currently located. Most of them weren't good at fighting, so they rarely left the camp to explore the Outer Realms. The resources and knowledge they needed could only be obtained from the simple and crude trading market in the camp. This would undoubtedly slow down their research, but it was safer than those Magi who spent most of their time immersed in the depths of the Outer Realms. Who was better between the two was up to the individual's opinion. Therefore, even though Grimm had just arrived, with the 2 points of main attribute from his 2 divine weapons, he had already surpassed those grade 5 seniors who were stationed in the camp. Closing his eyes, Grimm slowly sensed the surging flame energy in his body. He could feel that every strand of it had been dyed with a layer of gold. Although it couldn't completely reach the level of the laws of fire, it still possessed some of the mystical power of the laws of fire. More importantly, the important organs in his body were different from before. His flesh was a darker red, and his intertwined veins and tendons were thicker and more powerful. Every time the flame energy flowed in and out of his body like a tidal wave, it would become more condensed and heavy. Many of his bones were already showing signs of crystallization. Specks of tiny red crystals had replaced the fragile bone granules, becoming the main material used to construct Grimm's skeletal frame. These crystal grains echoed and resonated with the flame energy flowing around him, displaying extremely strong fire melting and fire resistance characteristic. This meant that the stronger the flame energy, the more active these crystals would be, and the stronger their physical defense and elemental resistance would be. However, after this special transformation, Grimm's weight had already exceeded a ton, and the strength and density of his flesh had reached a shocking level. Grimm slowly stretched his body and limbs, his bones and joints crackling all over his body. A copious amount of power quickly surged in his body, giving him the illusion that he could tear a mountain apart with his bare hands. Grimm raised his right hand and turned it over and over in front of his eyes, admiring it. In his mind, the AI chip projected a dense waterfall of data, covering his entire vision. This feeling of power was not an illusion, it was real. Under the AI chip's scanning, the flesh on Grimm's right hand gradually became transparent, revealing the muscles, tendons, blood vessels, and the flame energy flowing within them. The golden hand bone, the golden blood, the golden flame energy. With a thought, a large amount of flame energy surged into his right hand, and a subtle yet miraculous change occurred. The powerful flame energy and the golden bones and blood on his right hand intertwined and vibrated, producing layers of golden ripples that were invisible to the naked eye. The golden ripples were too dense, causing the power to seep out of his flesh and skin, forming a special flame force field around his right hand. Grimm stretched out his index finger and drew a line in the air, and the once indestructible void split open into black cracks. The fine spatial fragments slashed across Grimm's right hand like blades, but they did not damage his skin at all, and were directly repelled by the flame force field. Spatial fragments. Their penetrative and cutting power was second to none in a plane. Now, even it could not hurt Grimm's flesh and skin, which showed that the strength of the flame force field had exceeded the limits of the plane's power. Grimm then took out a strange dagger made of black wrought iron, coated in fine gold, and enchanted with sharpness and magic penetration. He used the dagger to cut his right hand a few times, but other than leaving a few dark red marks, it did not harm his flesh at all. It seemed that the flame force field could also block physical attack. Grimm added a bit more force, and the dagger's tip pressed down on the skin of his right hand, but it still did not cut through. At this moment, the skin on Grimm's right hand was as tough as a demonic dragon's leather armor, and only a +3 enchanted weapon would be able to harm his skin. Grimm hesitated for a moment before dispersing the flame energy in his right hand. As a result, the invisible layer of flame protection field also disappeared. This time, Grimm used more force, and the +2 enchanted dagger finally cut through the skin of his right hand, leaving a 30-centimeter long wound on the back of his hand, revealing the dark red flesh underneath. Golden blood flowed out of the wound, staining the tip of the dagger, and immediately sizzling sounds of metal being corroded and burned could be heard. Grimm picked up the dagger, and was surprised to find that the dagger's blade was full of dents, looking like a sawtooth. The body of the blade was bright red, showing signs of softening and melting. Grimm's flesh instinctively retaliated, and the +2 enchanted dagger was almost destroyed. And in this short period of time, the huge wound on Grimm's right hand began to close up. 15 seconds later, there was only a dark red scar on the back of his right hand, and the wound had disappeared. 27 seconds later, even the scar had disappeared. The back of his right hand became smooth again, tender and supple. It was impossible to tell that he had suffered any injuries. Grimm nodded with satisfaction. He then took out strong acid, strong corrosion, and various other strange solutions to test the strength of his body. Finally, the AI chip came up with a more detailed and comprehensive report. As he had not undergone any special tempering, Grimm's vitality was very ordinary. He had only reached 35 points by relying on the accumulation of high-grade resources and the nourishment of the astral beast bloodline. In the plane, this kind of vitality was comparable to that of a rank 3 dragon. However, in the outer regions, this kind of vitality could only be considered below average among the great rank 5 magi. It was stronger than those magi who comprehended laws, but it was left far behind by the physique-tempering magi, bloodline magi, and rank 5 magical creatures. According to the AI chip's calculations, without the support of flames, Grimm's body could only withstand magic weapons below rank 2. With the protection of the flames, he could withstand magic weapons below rank 3. With the protection of the 2 divine weapons, magic weapons below rank 4 would have no effect on his body. Only transcendent grade weapons of grade 5 and above could inflict visible damage to him. As for the recovery rate of his body, Grimm was only average. If the enemy's attack did not contain any spells or laws, even if it was a broken limb, he could completely recover in half a day. However, he would need to expend a certain amount of energy to do so. Chapter 1443. As soon as Grimm woke up, his mental activity was captured by the alien brain that controlled the entire Steel City. "Master, you're finally awake. While you were asleep, I've received 11 invitations to meet. What do you think?" The hall was immediately filled with the mental energy ripples of the alien brain, Gaz Ruvi. Invitations to meet? Grimm's mental energy quickly connected with the alien brain, and a large amount of relevant data immediately flowed into his consciousness. In the past, he would never have dared to directly connect with the alien brain. After all, the human brain could not compare to the alien brain. Without the support of powerful data processing and brainpower, just the impact of the data was enough to cause unimaginable damage to the consciousness. Burning Ring Suna, Dark Wing, Ire, Witchcraft Research Union, Gallman, Blood Source Society, Fred, Light of Witchcraft, Albert. To be honest, Grimm could not help but feel dizzy as he looked at the names of wizard organizations and the names of the people he had never heard of. With his level in the past, it was difficult for him to come into contact with these great wizards. At that time, even if he had prepared gifts and taken the initiative to visit them, he would not have been able to get any attention from them. But now, after becoming a level 5 great wizard, even if he stayed at home, he would still receive snowflakes of invitations. But Grimm knew almost nothing about this information, so he was clueless as to how he should deal with it. Still, with such a knowledgeable person guarding him, Grimm naturally would not let go of this opportunity. Thus, with the help of the mental link, Grimm quickly obtained most of the information he wanted from the alien brain. It had to be said that the foreign camps were a hodgepodge of good and bad people. Most of the people stationed here were old pedants who did not like to fight and only liked to immerse themselves in research and experiments in the laboratory. Their strength might be above most mid to high-level wizards, but in the group of level 5 wizards, they were the typical weaklings. Once they left the wizard's pagoda, once they left the camp, it was unknown how much combat power they could unleash. It was precisely because these great sorcerers had a long lifespan. Therefore, in order to research the content they liked, they set up a large network in more than 10 sorcerer camps, establishing one small sorcerer organization after another that outsiders would find hard to understand. These wizard organizations usually only had 3 to 5 people, and most of the members were great wizards. Occasionally, they would invite some talented level 4 wizards to join. They were usually formed around a topic that everyone was interested in and did not involve too much profit or power. This was the case for the Witchcraft Research Union and the Light of Witchcraft. Apart from that, there were also some special sorcerer organizations that recruited members with the same ideals. They belonged to a secret group that had a closer relationship, a tighter organization, and a stronger binding force. These organizations included the Burning Ring, Dark Wings, and the Blood Source Society. According to the intelligence gathered by the abnormal brain over the past 200 years, the Burning Ring mainly recruited fire element spellcasters. It could be considered a small organization formed by all the fire element sorcerers in Exidar and the surrounding camp. The Dark Wings was a secret organization formed by a group of dark wizards. Its members, research, and location were unknown. The Blood Source Society was based in the Exidar camp, and it was a secret organization that specialized in bloodline research. The reason why they had invited Grimm was probably because he had the bloodline of the Star Beast. After going through the information on the alien brain, Grimm had a simple understanding of the origins of these invitations. It had to be known that as the power at the top of the wizard world was reaching its saturation point, there were fewer and fewer level 5 wizards leaving the main plane. Hence, new blood was hard to come by. It was no wonder that most of the wizard organizations in the Exodar camp had extended an olive branch to Grimm, looking forward to meeting him soon. After going through the 11 invitations, Grimm found 2 familiar names. The Great Wizard Salubo, the Great Wizard Onake. Seeing these 2 names, Grimm could not help but furrow his brows and sink into deep thought. They were all Tier 6 great sorcerers. Furthermore, Grimm had some sort of relationship with them. Onake was the current ruler of the Exodar camp. Although he had a level 7 great wizard, Ironvald, above him, Ironvald would not show his face for hundreds of years. However, the latter often disappeared for centuries, so most of the time, the internal affairs of the camp were handled by the grade 6 great wizard One-Eye. It was reasonable and logical for him to invite Grimm to meet him. However, there was a problem with the great wizard Salubo. To be honest, Grimm and Salubo had some conflict. Grimm was originally from the Salubo family, and he had lived in the Salubo family since he was an apprentice until he reached Tier 2. During this period, he had been fortunate enough to have a brief encounter with the great wizard Salubo. Although it was only a projection of the great wizard Salubo's clone, it had inherited most of the great wizard's will. Later on, Grimm and a few of the higher-ups in the family parted on bad terms and left in anger to found his own Crimson family. The infighting between the Crimson family and the Salubo family had lasted for 300 to 400 years. The most serious conflict between the two was during a Tier 3 sorcerer selection in the scattered forest of towers. Grimm had crushed the Tier 3 sorcerer, Senazar, and knocked her out on the spot. She had lost the best opportunity to become a Tier 4 sorcerer. Since then, Senazar had never appeared again. It seemed that he had been transferred to some other plane, and a purple-eyed wizard had replaced him. It was not difficult to see that the conflict between the Salubo family and Grimm was very serious. So, why did the great wizard Salubo want to see Grimm at this moment? He couldn't possibly have come all the way here to teach him a lesson, right? Grimm asked himself. If he was really a vengeful person, he would have eradicated the Salubo family long ago when he was ruling the central continent. The reason why he had not done anything to the Salubo family was because of the great wizard Salubo family. As such, the great wizard Salubo did not have much malicious intent. It was more likely that he wanted to ease the tension between them. After all, the great wizard Salubo had left the wizard world for a long time, and his family's power had gradually declined. On the other hand, Grimm's Crimson family was like the sun in the sky in the central continent. Grimm closed his eyes and thought, gradually figuring out what he needed to do next. Finally, Grimm opened his eyes and contacted the alien brain. "Help me contact Sir Aune. Tell him that I, Grimm, will personally pay him a visit." Exiled Lands, Exorda Camp. Central Wizard Tower. When Grimm walked into the hall on the first floor, wearing a simple red wizard robe, the wizards entering and exiting the place parted to the sides and took the initiative to greet him. No one who could make a living in the outer world was weak. The weakest wizard among them was at least a grade 2 wizard. Most of them wore a yellow badge representing the Exorda camp on their chests. This meant that they were part of the management team of the Exorda camp and had the corresponding authority to enforce the rules. Even though they had never met Grimm before, that did not stop them from knowing his identity. Grimm was the only Tier 5 great sorcerer from the main plane in the past 500 years. Thus, on the second day after Grimm arrived at the Exorda camp, his portrait and achievements had already spread like wildfire in the camp. Of course, part of the reason the wizards in the camp were chasing after this information was out of curiosity. The other reason was that they wanted to get to know this legendary fire wizard and avoid offending the great wizard. This kind of situation was not uncommon in the camps of the outer world. Some ignorant fellows swindled their way to some of the great sorcerers. Thus, the great sorcerers were enraged and massacred the other party's family. After this happened a few times, all the sorcerers in the camp learned to be obedient. Every time they arrived at a camp of the outer world, the first thing they had to do was to buy information about the leaders of the camp. With this, they would not cause any trouble that could not be dealt with. Thus, during the 11 years that Grimm had been in hibernation, everything about him had spread like wildfire in the camp. The fastest wizard to advance in rank. His battle prowess was valiant, and he had even unified the central continent. Killed many lesser disaster lords. Insta-killed the fire god's projection. Any one of these pieces of information would be huge news that people would ponder for a long time. However, at this moment, they were all focused on a newly promoted Grade 5 Great Wizard. Thus, during this period of time, Grimm's name was like thunder in the ears of the people in the Exhorta camp. For a time, he even overshadowed some of the veteran Grade 5 Great Wizard. The most direct result of this was that the moment Grimm stepped out of Steel City and arrived at the gate of the Wizard's Pagoda at the center of the Exhorta camp, he was immediately recognized by every wizard he met. To be honest, he had stepped into a completely foreign land, yet every stranger he met bowed and greeted him. This strange psychological experience caused a strange expression to appear on Grimm's face. He did not know how to deal with it. Fortunately, he was a great wizard, and no one here dared to find fault with him. The first person to greet Grimm was an old acquaintance, Kerf, the person in charge of the patrol department of the Exhorta camp and a peak Grade 4 Great Wizard. After asking about Grimm's intentions, Kerf enthusiastically communicated with the tower spirit of the Wizard's Pagoda, Compass. Chapter 1444. Out of Grimm's expectations, the door only opened 3 days later. 3 days later, the tightly shut door suddenly opened, and the great wizard Onaik, who was dressed in a black robe and had a gloomy expression, hurried out. He raised his head and saw Grimm standing respectfully outside the door. "Who are you? Why are you here? Commons, your vigilance is getting worse and worse." Onaik, who was in a bad mood, seemed to have forgotten about Grimm's existence. He muttered angrily, "Respected Sir Onaik, please watch your words. I've already sent you information about Wizard Grimm's visit 3 days ago. You were too engrossed in the 9th experiment and chose to ignore it." Common's sharp rebuttal echoed in the space. Hearing Common's explanation, Onaik scratched his head and continued to mutter that he understood. "You are Grimm?" Onaik looked up, as if he was trying to recall something. "That's right, you just advanced to level 5 in the main plane not long ago." "Yes, I remember now." Grimm stood quietly and respectfully, trying his best to restrain his mental energy. His sharp senses told him that the thing standing in front of him was not a living thing, but a ball of intertwined yet orderly light of laws. Hundreds of chains of laws were tightly wrapped around the law core, then stretched out in all directions like octopus tentacles. There were even some law chains that entered the void of the plane out of thin air, as if they were maintaining a close and synchronized connection with some other planes. Of course, the thickest chain of laws was connected to the central wizard pagoda in front of him. As long as the great wizard Onaik needed it, he could connect to the tower spirit at any time and control everything that happened in the central wizard pagoda. As if sensing Grimm's gaze, the great wizard Onaik's body shone brightly, and a formless ripple of laws cut off all of Grimm's mental energy tentacles. He then hid himself in a ball of intense light that no one could look at directly. Grimm took a step back, and he could not help but rub his eyes. He did not know what method Onaik used, but he felt a piercing pain in his eyes, and he could no longer see anything. "Lad, let me teach you a lesson. When you're outside, don't always use your mental energy tentacles to probe around. If you meet someone with a bad temper, just based on your actions just now, they'll punish you." Grand Wizard Onaik chuckled, Seeing that you're a newcomer who has just left the main plane, I'll let it slide this time. Thank you for your guidance." Grim bowed to express his gratitude while slowly releasing fire elements to repair the damage to his eyeball. To be honest, a normal person would find it hard to adapt to the sudden change of status from a bossy superior to a newbie who had nothing right after coming out of the plane. Seemingly satisfied with Grim's attitude, a smile appeared on Aunake's face as he said indifferently, "Come with me." With that, a 2-meter-tall small portal suddenly appeared in front of Aunake, and he walked into it without hesitation. Grim quickly followed suit. The teleportation point was located in a luxurious and spacious reception room. The whole room was filled with a soft and bright white light, illuminating the floor, walls, and ceiling. In the middle of the room was a large wooden table and chairs, with various wizard spell books, scrolls, brushes, ink, and other writing utensils scattered across the table. Once Aunake returned, he sat behind the wooden table and rummaged through the messy storeroom. Finally, he pulled out an old scroll from the bottom of a slanted pile of books and threw it to Grim. "Take a look for yourself. As a newcomer, if you want to stay in a sorta camp for a long time, you'll have to follow the rules. Also, if you want to build a wizard's pagoda within the camp, you'll have to report the location and specifications of the wizard's pagoda." Grim's fingertips felt the unusual toughness and smoothness of the material as he held the scroll in his hand. The AI chip immediately projected the conclusion of the material in his mind. A dragonhide scroll. The reason why Grim was certain that it was a dragonhide scroll was because he could sense a faint aura of a dragon from it. Only someone like him, who owned a small plane of the giant dragons and was in contact with various dragon materials, would be able to sense it so keenly. He unfurled the dragonhide scroll and immediately saw the densely packed magical words on it. The Kembian language. This could be considered one of the most widely used magical languages in the Magus camp. The contents of the scroll were simple. It introduced the scale and rules of a sorta camp, as well as some rules that outsiders had to follow, as well as some special matters to take note of. Generally speaking, any camp in the outer realm would welcome the great magi with open arms. After all, the more great wizards there were, the greater the power and influence of the camp. Moreover, every great sorcerer did not roam the world alone. For them to be able to reach where they were today, they all had the support of a considerable force behind them. Hence, every time a great magus was stationed in the camp, it was equivalent to bringing in a magus organization that had considerable influence in the plane. As for the size of the faction, it depended on the great wizard's talent in management and management. However, most wizards did not like to do such trivial things, so it was rare for a camp to grow into a large faction. The true master of a sorta camp belonged to the great wizard Irenwald, and the one in control was his disciple, the great wizard Onik. If Grim wanted to stay in a sorta camp for a long time, he would inevitably have to build a wizard tower of his own, which would be incorporated into the camp's management. Of course, Grim had already established himself in the Exodar camp more than 200 years ago. It was the Steel City outside the camp. However, this Steel City was outside the camp, and did not receive the camp's direct protection. Hence, most of the time, the Steel City could only defend itself against the attacks of wandering denizens of the stars or astral beasts. Once Grim chose to join a sorta camp, he would receive the protection of a great wizard, but at the same time, he would have to take on some of the camp's responsibilities. That was, he would have to take up a position in some of the camp's law enforcement departments, becoming one of the managers. Of course, as a great wizard, he did not need to do all the hard work himself. There were complete and efficient teams in every department of the camp, and they were the workers that supported the entire operation of the camp. As the top-level managers, the great wizard only needed to check on their work regularly, and then reward or punish them according to the rules. Only when something big happened that they could not handle would the great wizard have to step forward and solve it. and such a big event would only happen once or twice in 8 to 10 years, hence, most of the great magi would not reject such a duty. Moreover, only by taking control of the camp's law enforcement department would they be able to place some trusted subordinates there. This way, they would be able to meddle in the camp's resources and material market, and obtain some rare resources that could only be found in the outer regions. Such a mutually beneficial situation was undoubtedly very beneficial to a newcomer who had just stepped out into the world. Unfortunately, Grimm had his own plans for his future, and naturally could not follow in the footsteps of those ordinary people. Have you chosen? Which department of the camp are you going to join? Onaik asked impatiently as he yawned. Grimm carefully returned the dragon hide scroll and said softly, "My lord, I do not intend to join the camp." The air in the room suddenly froze for a moment. Onaik suddenly raised his head, and carefully sized up Grimm for the first time. "You said, you do not wish to join the camp? Could it be that you have connections with other camps? Did the Endless Garden pull you over?" For some reason, when the name Endless Garden was mentioned, Onaik's lazy gaze suddenly turned cold, as if there was a trace of anger hidden within. Endless Garden? Grimm shook his head slightly. "I've never heard of this name." "Then what are you planning to do instead of staying in the camp to understand the situation in the outer regions and collect some resources?" "The situation in the outer regions is very complicated. Don't think that you can roam around here as you wish just because you have the strength of a grade 5 wizard. Over the past few thousand years, I know of at least a dozen great wizards who have fallen in the outer regions. Don't be rash. I plan to go to the fire elemental realm to develop myself. That place suits my soul, and should be much better than the camps in the outer regions." Fire elemental realm. Onaik muttered to himself, and could not help but nod in agreement with Grimm's thoughts. Indeed, as a pure fire wizard, if Grimm went to the fire elemental realm, he would not be rejected by the native fire elementals there. As long as he was willing to put in the effort and work, he would have no problem becoming a carefree fire elemental lord in the fire elemental realm for hundreds of years. As for becoming a fire elemental lord, it seemed that he would need the blessing of the fire elemental realm. As an outsider who had snuck in, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to get such preferential treatment. Since you do not plan to become a member of the camp, you cannot stay here for too long. Furthermore, the small trading point you set up outside the camp is no longer protected by the camp. Have you thought about the consequences? I have. All right, then you can leave. Remember, you cannot stay in the camp for more than a year. You must leave the Exodar camp within a year. Grimm bowed in acknowledgement and was about to leave. Just as he was about to teleport away, Onaik's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "You've just arrived, and there will definitely be many organizations wanting to rope you in. You have to pick carefully, and don't get involved in the conflicts between the high-ranking magi." Chapter 1445. The Fire Elemental Plane. At the edge of the Sea of Ashes. This was a world of flames that was completely different from the material plane. Apart from the fire element, there were no other elemental particles. The mountains, rivers, earth, and sky were all formed by special forms of fire element. Even a small patch of soil on the surface contained an impressive amount of fire element. Most of the fire elemental creatures had no intelligence or consciousness. They were born in flames and wandered aimlessly in this fire elemental plane until their consciousness died. Only those fire elemental creatures that had accidentally fused with the flames of the outside world and grew stronger could develop true intelligence. Hence, in the fire elemental plane, fire elemental creatures that had extraordinary intelligence and could control their own lives were extremely rare. The elemental plane was different from the material plane. It was almost completely open. The four main elemental planes were like a public elemental domain. Spellcasters from any material plane could receive a response from the elemental plane through sacrifice, resonance, and exchange. Just like the flame gate that Grimm usually cast, he could sacrifice a portion of his mental strength and fire energy to open a gate to the fire elemental plane and recruit some elemental warriors to fight for him. And this was the core content of most of the fire summoning spells. Today was another ordinary and peaceful day in the fire elemental plane. However, at the edge of the Sea of Ashes, a dense teleportation gate suddenly opened, and Grimm strolled out. Different from the outside world, Grimm's spirit was roused the moment he stepped in. In the air, rich and lively fire elements surged into his body like a tide, causing his human body, which had been suppressed for a long time, to burst into a pillar of fire that soared into the sky with a bang. Grimm's body also expanded in the raging flames, only stopping when he was 100 meters tall. Apart from the changes in his body, the law of fire in Grimm's body was also stimulated by the dense fire element and materialized. 2 different colored flame halos vibrated around Grimm's body, continuously circling back and forth. Every time they intersected, they would sprinkle bits of magical radiance. The law system hidden behind the fire elemental world was also triggered by Grimm's law of fire. Some unknown things were transmitted into Grimm's body through the chain of laws. At the same time, some of Grimm's unique laws were transmitted into the massive system of laws of the plane. The 2 of them coupled and exchanged with each other, thereby triggering some changes in the laws of fire. Ordinary creatures would not be able to sense this anomaly at the level of rules, but it could not escape the notice of the flame monarch, Gromus, who was just a wall away. A majestic flame will cross the air and collided with Grimm's consciousness. Grimm let out a muffled groan, and the flames around his body dimmed. Then, under Grimm's urging, they suddenly shone brightly and withstood his opponent's barbaric charge. "So it's you. I was talking about an inexplicable soul that popped out from there. You're already at level 5. It was the consciousness of the flame monarch, Gromus, who had once fought with Grimm. Its actions were rude and domineering, not because it had any opinions or hostility towards Grimm, but because it was an instinct of a flaming creature. In other words, flaming creatures did not understand the meaning of the word gentle. If Grimm's spiritual force had not increased greatly after advancing to level 5, the power of Gromus would have caused his body to explode and his spirit to dissipate. Greetings, Lord Flame Monarch Gromus. Although Grimm was of the same rank as Gromus had advanced thousands of years earlier than him. This kind of long experience required a certain amount of respect. You human magi may be short-lived, but I'm impressed by your passion for advancing. However, human, since you've reached level 5, you'll have to abide by the laws of the fire elemental plane. Gromus's resonant voice echoed in Grimm's mind. I was just about to ask Lord Flame Monarch, what do I need to pay attention to in this place? Grimm lowered his posture and asked softly. There's nothing special you need to pay attention to. After all, you're all powerful beings who have surpassed the realm of extraordinary. As long as you don't invade the territories of other flame monarchs, you can do whatever you want here. Gromus warned, however, remember not to go within 100 miles of the territories of other flame monarchs. Otherwise, you'll start a war between the flame monarchs. Grimm sucked in a breath of cold air. Only now did he realize why Gromus' will of flames had chased after him the moment he released his spiritual force. Seeing that you're an old acquaintance and have just entered the fire elemental plane, I won't pursue this matter further. Gromus then passed over a large map of the Flame Monarch's territories and chuckled. This is the distribution of the Flame Monarch's territories within 1,000,000 miles of the Sea of Ashes. You can find a territory that isn't under the jurisdiction of a flame monarch and settle down. Over there, you can take as many territories as you want. However, don't slaughter the natives of the fire elemental plane for no reason. Otherwise, once the will of the plane lists you as an unwelcome individual, You won't be able to make any more friends in the fire elemental plane. Grimm nodded in silence. He knew that Gromus was repaying him for the divine flame stone. Although it had been a fair trade, Gromus had obtained the divine flame stone, and Grimm had obtained the knowledge to condense flames of laws. On the whole, however, the flame monarch Gromus had gained a small advantage. If Grimm was still that insignificant human magus, the flame monarch Gromus would not have cared too much about this. Now that Grimm had become a rank 5 magus that was on par with him, he had no choice but to treat him fairly and try his best to rope in this powerful magus with great potential. "Thank you, Lord Gromus. I'll contact you as soon as I've settled down." Having obtained what he wanted, Grimm naturally could not wait to bid farewell to Gromus. "All right, I wish you all the best. I hope I'll still be able to sense your presence the next time I wake up," Gromus replied in a low, muffled voice, and the enormous will of flames instantly dissipated, returning to the depths of the sea of ashes. Elemental beings were all lazy fellows. Their life dimensions were different from those of other planes. Even the most ordinary fire elemental could easily live for hundreds of thousands of years. A flame monarch like Gromus had a lifespan of more than 100,000 years. Hence, their concept of time was extremely long and loose. Their favorite way of making friends was to slowly observe and judge each other's character, and character over thousands of years. In truth, ordinary beings of other planes did not even have the right to be friends with them. In the eyes of elemental beings, one's vigorous life was just a small moment when they took a nap or went on a journey. In the time it took for them to turn around, you would have already died of old age or illness. What right did you have a heart-to-heart chat with them? Grimm had also reached rank 5, but his lifespan was only a tenth of Gromus. Hence, Grimm was already overjoyed that Gromus was so friendly. After a few flame leaps, they left the sea of ashes and found a quieter place. Only then did Grimm quickly communicate with the AI chip. In the past, he'd thought he'd need to interrogate a few flame lords to obtain information on the internal geography of the fire elemental plane and the distribution of power. Now, he'd obtained it easily. Next, he naturally had to formulate an effective plan of action. AI chip, show me the map that I just obtained. In the blink of an eye, an extremely large map was projected in his mind. The entire map was drawn with the sea of ashes at the center. The sea of ashes stretched for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, occupying the center of the map. It was marked red, and above it was the crown of Gromus sovereign. The surrounding 200,000 to 300,000 kilometers was marked yellow. This was the territory of Gromus subordinates. Gromus territory covered an area of 500,000 square kilometers, and the area he ruled was equivalent to a third of the central continent Grimm was in. It didn't sound like much, but you had to know that in the fire elemental plane, there were hundreds of flame monarchs like Grooms, and this was the truest and most direct depiction of the power of the fire elemental plane. 2 of the 4 corners of the map had been painted dark red. These were the territories of the flame monarchs Thanos and Zetas. One was a rank 5, the other a rank 6, and they were powerful lords that could not be provoked casually. In that case, only the southwest and northeast directions still had large patches of green land. Those were scattered areas ruled by high, middle, and low-level flame lords. If Grimm wanted to settle down soon, he would have to think about those rank 4 flame lords. Southwest and northeast, Grimm's gaze wandered between the 2 directions, and all he could see were completely unfamiliar names of places and overlords. Firebird Peak, Lord Zamek, rank 4. Burning Harbor, Flame Spirit, rank 3. Giant Rock Mountain, Molten Giant, rank 3. Land of Light, Undying Bird, rank 3. It had to be said that the vastness of the fire elemental plane had given rise to a large number of flame creatures. All kinds of fire creatures, races, and tribes occupied different regions, reproducing, living, and strengthening for generations. The ones marked on the map were the large and medium-sized organizations of rank 3 and 4, and the smaller ones were ignored. No matter how panicked Grimm was, he would not go after the smaller ones. Chapter 1446. Half a month later, Blazing Cavern. Grimm's mighty 100-meter-tall body stood atop a small volcano, silently observing the dark red world of black smoke and flames around him. As the former ruler of this place, the darkweb spider matriarch who had ruled the Blazing Cavern for close to 2,000 years, Lakbeth was lying at Grimm's feet, her bulging belly still glowing with the golden runes left behind by the inextinguishable flames. Lakbeth was in a miserable state. 3 days ago, this mysterious flame giant had suddenly appeared in her territory and demanded her to submit and pledge her loyalty. Flame creatures were all cruel and ruthless creatures. How could they be willing to give up the freedom of their souls? Thus, an earth-shattering battle broke out just like that. What Lakbeth did not expect was that this flame giant was actually a terrifying Grade 5 powerhouse. He had instantly destroyed the blazing cavern that Lakbeth had painstakingly built over thousands of years, at the same time wiping out the countless traps and descendants of the darkweb spiders in one fell swoop. The battle between the two of them went from the burning cave to the Shinga volcano, and only ended with the defeat of the mother of spiders, Lakbeth, after a distance of 200 kilometers. Lakbeth was a 5-meter-tall fire-type ashen web spider with 6 pairs of sharp limbs and a pair of giant pincers. As the mother of the ashen web spiders, Lakbeth was most adept at laying fire web traps and breeding large numbers of fire spiders. She set up a large number of spider web traps near her lair to hunt for wandering flame creatures, and relied on absorbing the lava and flames from the remains of the elemental spiders to survive, growing stronger bit by bit. Her main body might not be too strong, but she had the most troublesome fire webs and a shocking number of descendants. It was precisely because of these 2 points that she was able to stand out from the many flame creatures, becoming the only Grade 4 Lord of the Flames within 1,000 kilometers. However, she did not live up to her name as a Lord of the Flames. Apart from her descendants, she did not have any other flame creatures following her. As for the reason, one could tell from her round belly that could never be full. In the face of such a sinister and cunning dragonweb spider mother who liked to ambush her enemies in the dark, Grimm naturally had many ways to deal with her. One of the main reasons why Lakbeth was so difficult to deal with was that her lair was built underground, and the cave passages were extremely narrow and winding. When she encountered those extremely powerful flame creatures, she would hide underground and not come out. And when she encountered a slightly weaker fellow, she would make a big move, using little fellows like the self-exploding fire spiders, dark web larvae, and web-weaving spiders to lure them into her fire web trap. Grimm was even more sinister than her when dealing with such a despicable person who bullied the weak and feared the strong. The first thing Grimm did when he arrived was to block the entrance to Lakbeth's lair. He then summoned the burning heaven flame and blew it to every corner of the underground lair. Smoldering spider. Although the darkweb spider was a fire-type creature, it could survive in lava that was thousands of degrees Celsius. However, against the flames of laws like the burning heaven flame, their fire resistance was instantly reduced to 0. They could only shriek and wail miserably in the sea of golden flames. Let alone these little fellows, even the Grade 4 brood mother Lakbeth was forced out of the lair. It could only drag its charred body covered in golden flames to fight Grimm. It was very awkward. Although Grimm was Grade 5, his strength, vitality, and agility were far from this Grade 4 broodmother. However, his powerful flame leap allowed him to dodge Lakbeth's swift bite, boiling splash, and smoldering destruction. Swift bite. Within the range of the fire web, Lakbeth's movement speed is increased by 300%. Attacks have a certain chance of paralyzing the enemy. Seething splash. Spray a 20-meter-long scorching venom in a 60-degree cone, dealing 3,000 degrees of fire damage and 2,000 degrees of venom damage to enemies within the cone. Smoldering destruction. Spits a terrifying 5 by 5 meter fire web filled with venom at the enemy. Enemies bound by the fire web will lose their ability to move and suffer great damage from the venom igniting the fire energy in their bodies. It had to be said that those who could stand out from the other flame lords and become the cream of the crop were all extremely powerful. They had some terrifying skills that others could not match up to. Even if Grimm's rank was higher than his opponents, and he had the protection of 2 divine weapons and 2 types of laws of fire, he still had to be careful against the Broodmother's smoldering destruction. It was impossible for him to turn the tables, but if he was not careful, he might be bitten twice by the fire web. That would be extremely embarrassing. That was why Latchbeth was able to use the fire web to force Grimm to retreat time and time again. After running all the way here and using up all the venom and fire web slime, Latchbeth was blasted by Grimm's fireball and left a flame brand on its body. Submit or be destroyed? Grimm roared. I'd rather die than surrender. Latchbeth had just screamed when the fire rune on her abdomen suddenly turned into a scorching golden flame that instantly engulfed her body. This golden flame was the materialized inextinguishable flames. It had the characteristics of ignoring magic resistance and burning souls. That was why, even with Latchbeth's grade 4 Flame Lord's fire resistance, she was in so much pain that her entire body was charred black. Fortunately, Grimm did not intend to kill her, so the inextinguishable flames only burned 5 fingers before it degenerated back into a fire rune. Grimm took out a bottle of healing potion and poured it on Latchbeth's charred body. With the powerful regenerative ability of a grade 4 creature and the help of the healing potion, Latchbeth only took a quarter of an hour to recover. A muffled thud sounded. Grimm raised his foot and stepped on the Broodmother, who was about to tear the surface and escape underground. He asked again in a booming voice, "Surrender or destruction?" "You." This time, Latchbeth did not even finish her sentence before her entire body was once again engulfed by the golden flames that soared into the sky. The sizzling sound of burning flesh resounded once more, and a pungent burnt smell filled the air. A moment later, the flames receded, and Latchbeth was once again rescued by Grimm. Hee, little spider, you can be stubborn. Anyway, I have a lot of healing potions here. It won't be a problem even if I torture you for 100 years. Tell me, what's your choice this time? Grimm sneered, the indifference in his words causing the Broodmother to feel a chill down her spine. As soon as Latchbeth said that word, the golden flames instantly engulfed her body, and her shrill screams resounded once more. A moment later, the flames subsided. Grimm frowned and scratched his head, saying with an apologetic expression, "Sorry, I activated the flames too early." "What did you say just now?" Crouching on the hard rock, the dying Lacebeth angrily waved its limbs and claws, cutting the volcanic rock beneath it into pieces and leaving scratches all over the place. Why did you come to me? There are many Flame Lords here. Why did you come to me alone? The Broodmother obviously had a deep grudge against this question. That's why you're the smartest. Grimm praised with a smile. This was his heartfelt words. Although those big fools were quite strong and their ranks were not low, they were all hot-tempered and straightforward, and did not know how to be flexible. They were all stubborn bulls that ran all the way to the dark, and threatening them with death was useless. In contrast, only these fellows with otherworldly bloodlines and smart enough brains knew fear and the value of life. All smart people were afraid of death. This was the iron law concluded by the wizards, and Grimm deeply agreed with it. What if I don't surrender? Even with such a serious injury, Latchbeth only needed to slow down for a moment before her whole body entered a state of rapid recovery, and even her speech became stronger. Then I'll play with you for a while, until my patience runs out. Grimm explained in a simple and honest manner, When that time comes, I'll twist off your head as a trophy, break off your spider legs to make daggers, pull off your claws to make scissors, and dig out your silk sac and poison glands to make magic equipment. Let me think, what other valuable things do you have on you? Right, I can even extract souls. Hey, little spider, do you have a spider crystal in your body? I heard it's something good. Hearing Grimm's explanation, the dragon-web spider queen, Lachbeth, could not help but shiver. As a high-level intelligent life form, she was different from those big guys who were born stupid and had violent temperament. She knew that if a high-grade elemental creature like her fell into the hands of a human magus, death was not the end, but the beginning of endless torture. Thinking about the miserable life of slavery that she would have to live for thousands of years, Lachbeth could not help but be overcome with sorrow. She lay there and bawled. However, as a strange-looking fiery spider, even if she cried like a pear blossom in the rain, in the eyes of humans, she would still look sinister and ugly. Hey, little spider, have you made up your mind? If you don't surrender, I'll have to eat your spider legs first. Grimm impatiently stomped on her feet, causing the spider mother to squeal in pain. I surrender. I surrender. The tyrannical was afraid of the wicked. The dragonweb spider queen Lakebess, who had been running amok in this area for 2,000 years, finally lowered her proud head and surrendered to Grimm. The next step was simple. Lachbeth released her consciousness, and Grimm branded his soul imprint within. Chapter 1447. With the help of a local tyrant, Grimm's work became much easier and more comfortable. Compared to the fire creatures that had lived in this area for tens of thousands of years, the Tier 5 Grimm was no weaker than a god of fire. No matter how much they struggled or resisted, they could not change the final outcome. Powerful strength was the key to ensuring that Grimm's will could be carried out. Taking down Lakibes was equivalent to pushing down the first domino. By relying on this snowball method, he would be able to establish a sizable influence in this area. However, most fire creatures did not have any lofty ambitions, nor did they have the ambition to rule the entire fire elemental plane. A Tier 5 flame monarch like Grimm, on the other hand, would occupy a good fire-filled land and enslave some of the fire creatures nearby. That was enough. There was no need to waste time attacking one flame lord after another. The fire elemental plane was a typical superlarge plane. Its space was more than 10 times that of a large plane like the sorcerer world. The difference in strength between the two sides was like heaven and earth. The sorcerer world could only bear up to Tier 4 strength, while the fire elemental plane had an upper limit of Tier 7 strength. This meant that there was a high chance of encountering terrifying fire creatures as high as Tier 7 in the fire elemental plane. Grimm would be no different from an ant in front of such a powerful being. As a Tier 5 fire shaman, Grimm naturally could not treat himself poorly. He had carefully selected a special place called the Molten Flame Altar for himself to reside in. According to legend, this molten altar was once a passage to a powerful Lord of Flame's divine kingdom. However, following a huge incident, the Flame Overlord had fallen completely, and the sacred flame on the molten flame altar had been extinguished as well. Even so, the sacred energy that had permeated the surroundings of the molten altar for tens of thousands of years had not completely dissipated. Hence, anyone who worshipped or believed in fire would not dare to approach the molten altar. As an outsider, Grimm naturally did not have the reverence inscribed in his soul like the fire creatures. Hence, among the massive map Grooms had given him, only the molten altar could match Grimm's Tier 5 status. And so, on the 68th day after entering the fire elemental plane, Grimm led the dragonweb spider queen Lachbeth to the molten fire altar. It was a silent and desolate land. Even with Grimm's powerful mental power, he could not sense any life or soul in this land. This place seemed to be under some kind of curse. Even the heat waves blowing on the scorching and dry land carried an indescribable aura of depravity. The wind was howling, the fire was whimpering, and the entire earth seemed to be weeping. As soon as they set foot on this land, the dragon-web spider queen, Lakebis, who was following closely behind Grim, stopped in her tracks. Her hideous face revealed a trace of reverence. "Master, you shouldn't choose this place. I smell death and resentment here. Even high-grade creatures like us might be contaminated by some bad things if we stay here for too long," Lacebeth advised hesitantly. Grim did not reply. Instead, he stood rooted to the ground and silently sized up the land before him. At the end of his vision, he could see undulating volcanoes in all four directions. Black smoke billowed from the tall volcanoes, and flames soared into the sky. Black clouds of smoke piled up in the sky, covering the entire world in a dark red. There was a rather gentle plain surrounded by mountains. At the center of the plain was a crescent-shaped lava lake that occupied an area of 20 square kilometers. The molten altar was right next to the sunken lava lake. The molten altar was unusually grand and majestic. It was surrounded by huge stone pillars that were over 100 meters tall, and in the middle was a 4-layered stone altar. At the top was a strange stone platform shaped like a compass. Due to the passage of time, the altar was very old and dilapidated. Not to mention that most of the stone carvings and patterns on the altar had already collapsed and fallen off. Even the huge stone pillars erected around it had mostly collapsed, only leaving behind stone pillars that were only 2 to 3 meters tall as foundations. For some reason, strange scenes inexplicably appeared in Grim's mind as he looked at the ruins that looked like ancient ruins. The entire sky and earth were fiery red, and a huge door of light that was over a kilometer wide stood in the middle of the plain. In front of the door of light, the molten altar was burning with a strange, glass-like purple flame. The huge plain was densely packed with flaming creatures that came from all directions. They were of different shapes and ranks, but they all looked fanatical. Under the guidance of the priests of the flames, they piously prayed to the purple flame on the altar. Every once in a while, the purple flame would suddenly burst out with a strong light, and then project a purple halo on the bodies of some of the followers. Every time the purple halo appeared, there would be a tsunami of cheers, and the prayers of the believers of the flame would also be raised to a deafening level. Under the envious gazes of the crowd, the followers whose bodies were projected by the purple light slowly walked up the altar, and then strangely passed through the huge door of light, completely disappearing from the scene. Every time this happened, the atmosphere would heat up to the point that it was about to explode. All the followers of the flames became even more pious and fanatical, looking forward to becoming the next batch of lucky ones to be chosen. Passing through the door of light, entering the kingdom of God, becoming one with the origin of the flames. For some reason, this indescribable strong desire also invaded Grim's consciousness. He could not help but want to kneel down and pray to the molten altar. Beep. Sensing the invasion of a mysterious will from the outside world, requesting host to remain vigilant. Beep. Detected that the host's consciousness has been confused. Immediately activating the protection of laws. In the next second, the two law halos around Grim's body suddenly collided with each other, sprinkling bits of law radiance. In an instant, a layer of golden light enveloped Grim's 100-meter-tall flaming body. With the isolation of the golden light, the indescribable feelings that had transcended time and space suddenly disappeared. Grim shuddered. When he came to his senses again, the scene before him suddenly disappeared, and he returned to the lonely and desolate state from before. Chip, what happened? What happened to me just now? Grim asked in a low voice. Beep. Strange spiritual force field detected in this region. Initial judgment is that of an ancient historical scene that has mysteriously reversed time and space. Requesting host to pay attention to spiritual defenses. Spiritual force field? Time and space reversed? Grim carefully thought about it, and could not help but become even more curious about the molten altar at the end of his vision. From the looks of it, it seemed like a powerful divine being had appeared in the fire elemental plane tens of millions of years ago. It had established a large divine kingdom of fire somewhere, and then left behind a molten altar here to select its followers to enter the divine kingdom. A god of the fire elemental plane, if such a being really existed, it would definitely be thousands of times more powerful than the god of fire in the world of gods. The number of followers and the number of fanatics were not on the same level. Most of the gods in the world of gods resided in a prime material plane, and no matter how many intelligent beings there were, they could not compare to the elemental planes. On top of that, elemental beings were mostly simple-minded and had simple needs, unlike the intelligent beings in the prime material plane who had messy thoughts and endless desires. Hence, if a god of fire really did appear, there would definitely be many fanatics in the fire elemental plane. It would be much better than fighting for the resources of those few followers in the prime material plane. However, according to Grimm's understanding, the most powerful being in the fire elemental plane was the rank 8 sovereign of flames. He had never heard of a god of fire that relied on faith. It seemed that it was very difficult for elemental beings to give birth to true elemental lords. All of this was said to be directly related to the Titans. Grimm had read about the ancient Magi's biographies in the Scattered Towers. Some Magi had speculated that the 4 elemental planes were where the basic particles of the multiverse were concentrated. They were also the source of all extraordinary abilities in the material plane. In order to prevent the 4 elemental planes from giving birth to beings that were too powerful and thus preventing the material plane from absorbing energy from the elemental plane, the Titans were ordered to patrol the elemental plane regularly and get rid of powerful beings that had the potential to become elemental lords. Hence, even though the 4 elemental planes had vast lands and endless elemental beings, the highest they could give birth to was a rank 8 elemental lord. There had never been a rank 9 elemental lord. This was the main reason why they were hiding behind the scenes. In that case, the fallen sovereign of flames should have been a powerful being at the peak of rank 8. It was precisely because it was too powerful that it had been attacked by the Titans, causing its divine kingdom to collapse and the altar to be destroyed. Even after tens of millions of years, the molten altar still retained a portion of the strange energy from ancient times. It could drag people into some sort of spiritual illusion and allow them to understand some ancient secret. However, Grimm had used his own strength to break free from the illusion. If he had not, what would have happened to him? Grimm hesitated for a moment before asking in a low voice, "Lakbeth, have you heard of this molten altar? Are there any taboos here?" Lakbeth, the mother of dragonweb spiders, curled up behind Grimm and scanned the altar in the distance with fear. Her voice trembled as she spoke. As long as it's a creature native to the fire elemental plane, it will not approach the molten altar of its own accord. On the contrary, outsiders seem to be summoned by the altar and are unknowingly drawn in. Do outsiders often go missing here? Yes. Many outsiders never appeared again after they got close to the altar. No one knew where they went. However, reliable information says that, at this point, even Lakbeth could not help but lower her voice. Their souls have been absorbed by the dead sovereign of flames, becoming the energy for its resurrection. As for whether it's true or not, I don't know. The sovereign of flames premeditated resurrection. This was shocking news. Chapter 1448. If it was someone else, they would have found another place to live after hearing about the molten fire altar. But Grimm's thought process was different from others. Hence, he decided to settle down here and study the strange and dangerous molten flame altar from afar. However, after having this idea, it was difficult to turn it into reality. The fire elemental plane had no shortage of laborers. There were tens of meters tall coolies who could lift a few tons at a time. However, there was a clear lack of architects with architectural skills and aesthetic views. Unlike the material plane, which had all sorts of professions and specialization, the fire elemental plane didn't have any professions at all. Naturally, there wouldn't be any corresponding skilled workers. There was only one type of profession in the fire elemental plane, and that was vagrants. The moment the fire elementals were born from the flames, they would wander around. If they found a suitable place to live, they would stay there for the rest of their lives. If not, they would wander forever until the consciousness in the core collapsed and returned to the chaotic flame energy. Therefore, the fire elemental plane was still in a chaotic, primitive state. There was no broad concept of a country, and there was no concept of cooperation. Fire elementals of the same race would live together in groups, forming a small, loose, and regional fire family. The strong fire elementals would gather a group of subordinates to serve as fire slaves. Those with a little more ability would become the Flame Lord, and the stronger ones would become the Flame Lord. The ones at the top of the fire elemental plane would be the Flame Lord. But no matter which one it was, their form of governance was the structure of a lord and a slave. However, the Flame Lord and the Flame Lord occupied a larger territory and had more slaves to control. But in essence, it was still the same as the Flame Lord. There was no concept of a country or region, and elementals did not need to work together to satisfy their daily need. They wandered around and could survive by absorbing some fire elementals. Naturally, there was no division of professions. As a result, if Grimm wanted to build a wizard tower here, he would have to hire the materials and architects from the outside world. The local fire elemental creatures could only serve as laborers at most, the kind that had no technical content and only had brute strength. After making up his mind, Grimm sent Lakbeth out to hunt down the Flame Lords in the surroundings. With the Nightmare Web Spider Mother's strength, any Flame Lord below Grade 3 would be a piece of cake. As for the overly powerful Tier 3 and Tier 4 Flame Lords, he could ignore them for now. He'd deal with them once Grimm was free. After finishing his work, Grimm left a flame mark beside the lava lake. He then tore open a spatial rift and returned to the Exodar camp. Grimm had crossed through space and appeared at the long-range teleportation formation hidden deep inside the Steel City. He stepped out of the iron-walled teleportation room, and the cloned brain sock was already waiting for him. "What's wrong?" Grimm's spirit was sharp, and he immediately noticed Sock's abnormality. "Yes, master." Even though the cloned brain Sock was arrogant and conceited, and his character was just as bad as his predecessors, he didn't dare to be negligent or impolite in the slightest when faced with the legendary fire wizard who was getting more and more powerful by the day. "Recently, many people in the camp have been asking about your whereabouts." "Oh, who are they?" Grimm abruptly stopped in his tracks and asked in a low voice. "They're not the old people in the camp. Most of them are powerful beings from various parts of the galaxy. They aren't very powerful, with some being at grade 1, 2, and 3. However, they've been asking about you the moment they've arrived, and they're especially concerned about where you're staying. Can you find out their identities?" Grimm laughed coldly, making some conjectures in his mind. "They come from all over the place, and there are many of them in different planes. It's very messy. However, they all have one thing in common: followers of the Fire God." Grimm asked in return. "More or less. Even if there are a few who aren't followers of the Fire God, they're like mercenaries from the astral plane." Grimm pondered for a moment and suddenly asked, "What's the relationship between the Magus faction and the world of gods in this region?" "It's very chaotic. Just as you know, the Magus faction has never been a monolithic entity. Their strategies are always influenced by the preferences of the higher-ranked Magi. Some Magi like to target the world of gods, attacking and plundering planes that are protected by the gods. Some Magi secretly collude with the world of gods, working together to conquer the Magic Eye Empire, the elves, or the dragons. There's even a possibility that they'll ally with a god to deal with another Magus." The cloned brain Sock introduced the situation in the outer regions to Grimm as he walked. Having developed in Exodar for 200 years, Steel City had become a private trading point, and it had its own sources of information. It was hard to tell the truth from the lies, and the information that Grimm had obtained through public channels was mixed together. This gave him a rough idea of the development of the entire Magus faction. On the whole, the Magus faction was not a builder, but a destroyer. Almost at the same time, the Magus faction was at war with the Magic Eye Empire, the Dragons, the Elven Empire, the World of Gods, the Elemental Plane, the Abyss Plane, and the Shadow Plane. Of course, these wars were not the actions of the Magus faction as a whole, but the actions of a small Magus organization or a powerful Magus. Like an octopus stretching its tentacles everywhere, the sorcerer faction chose their enemies according to the preferences of a certain superior sorcerer. For example, if a higher-ranked Magus urgently needed dragon cards or materials, he would incite and guide the lower-ranked Magi to focus their firepower on attacking the dragon's territory. They would invade their plane, kill the mid- and low-ranked dragons, and plunder the resources of the plane. In this process, the higher-ranked Magi would obtain the resources and materials they wanted, while the lower-ranked Magi would obtain benefits and the protection of the higher-ranked Magi. Both sides took what they needed, and everything was naturally a happy ending. However, the wrath of the dragons could only be endured by the entire Magus faction. High-ranked Magi who wanted to research the demonic bloodline would gather a group of Magi to barge into the Abyss world and fight against the Lords of the Abyss. As for whether or not the Magi camp could match the power of the Abyss world, no one cared at all. Indeed, it had to be said that Sock's theory was quite accurate. The Magus faction's external attack strategy was like a snake with many heads, taking a bite wherever there was an advantage. Very few of them had a clear strategic plan. If not for the fact that their enemies were just as chaotic and disorderly, the Magus faction would have long since been in trouble. Followers of the fire god, looks like I've caught the eye of the fire god Renai once more. Grimm shook his head and smiled wryly. He had no choice. The divine fire pearl was an ultimate fire treasure that he could not part with. Hence, there was no way to resolve the enmity between him and the fire god Renai. The fire god Renai was a rank 7 god, and had quite a reputation in the world of gods. She had many subordinates. Even Grimm would feel his scalp go numb if he was targeted by her, his heart thumping wildly. In the past, he had hidden in the Magus world, and no matter how capable she was, she could not do anything to him. However, now that he had stepped out of the plane and entered the outer regions, there were many ways for her to plot against him. Attacking Camp Isorda would be a joke. Camp Isorda was guarded by a rank 7 Magus, and it was not weak either. If the fire god Renai really lost her mind and came for revenge, Grimm would definitely wake up laughing in his dreams. Since attacking Exidar's camp directly wouldn't work, the most effective method was to find out Grimm's whereabouts and then set up an ambush to kill him. This meant that Grimm had to be extremely careful when he entered and exited the Magus world, not giving his enemies the chance to catch him alone. Otherwise, any rank 6 god or clone sent by the fire god Renai would be enough to take his life. It was for this reason that Grimm had given up on Camp Isorda, choosing to settle in the fire elemental plane instead. There were too many good and bad people here, and it was difficult to guard against sneak attacks. On the other hand, the fire elemental plane was a place where he could attack or retreat, making it a good place to stay. As for whether the fire god Renai would come to the fire elemental plane to cause trouble for him, that was a little unnecessary. It should be noted that a god of fire was the meat of Tripitaka, which all high-tier fire creatures coveted. If Grimm really dared to send a god or clone into the fire elemental plane, the Flame Lords would definitely go berserk. What made a god of fire the target of so many Flame Lords was the divinity within their bodies. That was the highest grade of flame energy converter, and it was suitable for all fire creatures. A complete fire divinity could directly upgrade a Tier 4 fire creature to Tier 5. The number of divinity fragments formed after the fire divinity split could also increase a fire creature's strength significantly. For example, the fire divinity fragment Grimm had obtained could directly upgrade an apprentice fire creature to the peak of Tier 4, which was equivalent to a demigod. One could just imagine how powerful it was. It was precisely because of the divinity fragment's strength and rarity that Grimm was reluctant to use it to increase his strength. Instead, he kept it in his clone and hid it in the sorcerer world. He was not so foolish as to carry the divinity fragment around and even bring it to the fire elemental plane. If he really did that, the flame monarch Grimm would most likely attack him the moment he sensed the divinity fragment's aura. Friendship, affection. These empty words were worthless in the face of great benefits. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.